People love complicated answers. Nature doesn't. Let me show you something embarrassingly simple. 2 slits and a screen. That's it. No philosophy, no poetry, just hardware. You fire particles one at a time, not waves, not clouds, one at a time. And somehow, impossibly, an interference pattern appears. That means each particle behaves as if it went through both slits. Now, here's where reality starts sweating. You decide to check which slit the particle uses. Just check. You don't touch it. You don't push it. You only ask a question. The moment you ask, the pattern disappears, not because you disturb the particle, but because nature refuses to answer 2 questions at once. This is not about technology. This is about information. Here's the uncomfortable part. If you erase the information after the particle has already passed the slits, the outcome still changes. Read that again. Your present choice rewrites what the particle appears to have done in the past. So don't talk to me about time like it's a straight line. Time behaves more like a negotiation. Nature doesn't commit to a history until it's forced to. And that should bother you because it means reality isn't sitting there fully formed waiting for us. It's waiting for a question. If you think this proves the universe is magical, you're lazy. If you think it's nonsense, you're arrogant. The correct response is discomfort. Because the universe is under no obligation to make sense to you. It only agrees to behave consistently when you stop lying to yourself about how simple it should be. And if you think you understand this experiment, you don't. That's not a failure. That's the beginning of intelligence. The simplest experiment that breaks reality doesn't require billion-dollar machines or exotic materials. It uses a wall, 2 narrow slits, a screen, and a single uncomfortable question. That's all it takes to humiliate common sense. You don't need advanced mathematics to feel the damage. You just need honesty. Imagine firing tiny particles, one by one, toward a barrier with 2 slits cut into it. Logic says each particle must choose one slit or the other. There are only 2 options, no mystery yet. But when you let the particles hit the screen behind the slits, a strange pattern appears. Not 2 simple clusters, but a series of bright and dark bands, a wave pattern. The kind you get when water overlaps with itself. That's impossible. A single particle cannot split itself into overlapping paths, and yet the pattern insists otherwise, even when the particles are sent one at a time, slowly, patiently, as if nature is daring you to accuse it of cheating. Each particle arrives alone, but together they build a pattern that only makes sense if each one behaved like a wave, exploring every possible path simultaneously. At this point, a reasonable person says, fine, let's catch it in the act. So you place a detector at the slits. Nothing violent. You're not smashing the particle. You're just asking a simple question, which slit did you go through? The moment you ask, reality flinches. The interference pattern disappears. The particles behave like ordinary objects again, choosing one slit, leaving behind 2 boring piles on the screen. No waves, no mystery, just obedience. This is where most explanations collapse, because it's tempting to say the detector disturbed the particle. That would be comforting. That would keep reality polite. But that explanation is wrong. The pattern disappears not because the particle was physically disturbed, but because information now exists. Nature doesn't care about your machines. It cares about what can be known. Here's the disturbing implication. The particle doesn't decide what it is until the question is settled, not until the information is locked in. And now the real trouble begins. You can design the experiment so that the decision to observe or not observe happens after the part. Eichel has already passed the slits. After, not before. Common sense screams that it's too late. The particle already chose its path. History should be fixed, but history refuses to cooperate. If the information is erased, the wave pattern returns, as if the particle never chose a path at all. If the information is preserved, the pattern vanishes, as if it always did. The present choice determines the past description. This is not philosophy. This is measured behavior. Reality behaves as if it keeps its options open, as if it delays committing to a story until it knows what questions will be asked. That should make you deeply uncomfortable, because it means the universe is not passively unfolding in time the way we imagine. We like to think time flows forward cleanly, cause first effect later. But this experiment laughs at that idea. It suggests that time is not a rigid chain, but a flexible bookkeeping system, adjusted to preserve consistency, not intuition. Notice what's missing here. There is no human consciousness required, no observer with a mind, no mystical intention, just the availability of information. Reality responds to what can, in principle, be known, not to who knows it. This destroys a very old assumption that particles are tiny things with definite properties, carrying their behavior with them through space and time. Instead, behavior emerges at the moment of interaction, when questions become unavoidable. The experiment doesn't say particles are confused. It says we are, because the universe is under no obligation to match the stories our brains prefer. Our brains evolved to throw spears and predict weather, not to understand a reality where outcomes depend on unanswered questions. And here's the intellectual trap. If you feel satisfied with any simple explanation, you've missed the point. Anyone who claims to intuitively understand this experiment is either lying or hasn't looked closely enough. The correct reaction is intellectual humility, not confusion as weakness, but confusion as accuracy. This experiment stands as a warning. If such a simple setup can shatter our assumptions about objects, causality, and time, then the problem is not with the universe. The problem is with how confidently we think we understand it. Reality is not weird. Our expectations are, and the double slit doesn't care whether you like that fact. Nature doesn't decide until you look. And that statement sounds poetic until you realize it's a technical description, not a metaphor. It isn't saying reality waits for human attention. It's saying something far more disturbing. Outcomes are not fixed until information becomes unavoidable. We grow up believing the world is already there, fully formed, moving along a clean timeline, whether we pay attention or not. A rock falls, a bullet travels, a planet orbits. We assume the universe carries a complete script, and observation merely reveals what was already written. That assumption works beautifully for everyday life. It fails completely at the fundamental level. When you isolate a particle and remove every unnecessary interaction, it stops behaving like a tiny object with a defined path. It behaves like a collection of possibilities, not uncertainty due to ignorance, but genuine indeterminacy. The particle is not hiding a decision. There is no secret answer waiting to be uncovered. So when you look, you are not discovering a fact. You are forcing one. This is where people panic and start reaching for mystical language. Resist that impulse. Nothing supernatural is happening. The universe is not conscious. It is not watching you. It is doing something much colder and more precise. It is enforcing consistency between questions and answers. An outcome cannot exist without a context. A position cannot exist without a frame of reference. A path cannot exist without a way to distinguish paths. Without those, the question, what happened, is meaningless, and nature ref uses to answer meaningless questions. This is why measurement is not passive. Measurement is an interaction that limits possibilities. It doesn't disturb reality, it defines it. The act of looking doesn't add noise, it removes ambiguity, and ambiguity is not a flaw in the system. It is the default state. The mistake is thinking of observation as peeking into a box. That image assumes the contents were already settled. A better image is locking a door. Once the door is locked, the building must decide which rooms are accessible. Before that, multiple routes remain valid. What's truly unsettling is that this decision doesn't have to be made immediately. Nature is remarkably patient. It allows multiple incompatible histories to coexist as long as no contradiction is exposed. Only when information is registered, when distinctions become irreversible, does the universe commit. This patience breaks our intuition about time. We imagine the past as fixed and the future as open. But at the quantum level, the past is only as fixed as the records that survive. Remove the records, and the past loosens its grip. This does not mean the past changes. It means the description of the past was never finalized. There is a crucial difference. The universe is not rewriting history. It is refusing to finalize it prematurely. This should demolish the comforting idea that particles carry properties like luggage as they move through space. Properties are not possessions. They are relationships. They only exist when something else demands them. Ask for position, and position appears. Ask for momentum, and momentum appears. Ask for a path, and a path appears. But ask for all of them at once, and nature simply says no, not because it's hiding something, but because the question itself is incoherent. This reveals something deeper about knowledge itself. Knowing is not a passive state. Knowledge is an active constraint imposed on reality. Every fact excludes alternatives. Every answer kills possibilities. That's the price of certainty. And nature is extremely economical with certainty. So when you look, you are not illuminating a dark room. You are burning away options. You are forcing the universe to take a stand where it previously refused to. That's why experiments don't just test theories. They shape what can be said about the world. Reality doesn't unfold independently of inquiry. It unfolds in response to it. This doesn't make science subjective. Quite the opposite. It makes it brutally objective. The rules governing which questions can be asked and which answers are allowed are rigid and unforgiving. Your preferences don't matter. Your intuition doesn't matter. Only consistency does. Nature doesn't decide until you look. Not because it's uncertain, but because uncertainty is more efficient than commitment. And until commitment is forced, possibility is not a bug. It's the feature that keeps the universe logically intact. If that bothers you, good. It should, because once you accept this, you can never again pretend that reality is simply out there, waiting patiently to be observed. Reality is something that crystallizes under pressure, and observation is the pressure point. And the moment you look, the universe answers, not because it wanted to, but because it had no choice. Time is not a straight line, and the sooner you stop pretending it is, the sooner reality starts making sense. The idea that the past is fixed, the present is a razor-thin moment, and the future is wide open feels obvious only because our brains were trained to survive, not to understand the structure of the universe. We experience time as a sequence, so we mistake experience for truth. Physics has no obligation to respect that mistake. In everyday life, cause comes before effect. You push a glass, it falls. You strike a match, it burns. This ordering is so reliable that we confuse it with a fundamental rule of existence. But that order is an AP. Approximation, not a law. It works at human scales, where information flows slowly and interactions are messy. Strip the system down to its most basic level, remove friction, noise, and excess interaction, and time stops behaving politely. At the fundamental scale, events are not arranged like beads on a string. They are arranged more like constraints in a logical system. What must be true, what cannot be true, and what is allowed to remain undecided for as long as possible. Time, in this sense, is not a river flowing forward. It is a bookkeeping process that ensures consistency. This is why certain experiments make it look as though the present is influencing the past. That description is misleading, but the discomfort it produces is earned. When an outcome depends on information that becomes available later, our instinct is to accuse time of running backward. In reality, what's happening is simpler and more disturbing. The story was never finalized in the first place. We assume the past is a completed archive, locked and immutable. But at the microscopic level, the past exists only as long as records exist. If no record survives that distinguishes between two histories, then insisting that one really happened is an emotional preference, not a physical necessity. Time doesn't demand that every event be immediately committed to history. It allows multiple compatible descriptions to coexist until a contradiction would arise. Only then does it enforce a single narrative. This idea clashes violently with common sense because common sense treats time as an external stage on which events march in order. Physics treats time as part of the system, something that interacts with information, measurement, and memory. Once you accept that, linear time stops being sacred. Consider this. If two different sequences of events lead to the same observable outcome and no surviving evidence can distinguish between them, then insisting on one true sequence adds nothing to prediction. Nature has no incentive to pick one just to satisfy our storytelling instincts. This is not philosophy sneaking into physics. This is efficiency. The universe doesn't waste resources specifying details that cannot, even in principle, be observed. Definiteness is expensive. Ambiguity is cheap. So ambiguity is tolerated until it becomes logically impossible. From this perspective, the arrow of time, the feeling that time flows forward, is not fundamental. It emerges from asymmetries. Entropy increases, records accumulate, memories form. Once records exist, the past solidifies. Before that, it's flexible. This explains why we never experience the future influencing the past in daily life. Our world is flooded with records. Every interaction leaves traces. Air molecules, light, heat, memory. Everything is recording everything else. The past becomes overdetermined. There is no room left for ambiguity, but remove those records, isolate the system, and the rigidity dissolves. Then time stops behaving like a line and starts behaving like a set of conditions. What matters is not what happened first, but what must be true for the whole story to make sense. This reframing is uncomfortable because it strips time of its emotional authority. We want the past to be sacred. We want it locked. We want causality to be simple. But the universe does not care what feels comfortable. It only cares that its descriptions don't contradict themselves. So when experiments suggest that future choices affect past outcomes, the correct response is not to panic about paradoxes. The correct response is to recognize that you're imposing a linear story on a system that never promised to follow one. Time is not broken. Our intuition is, at the deepest level, the universe is not playing a movie frame by frame. It is solving a consistency problem. And time, as we experience it, is the shadow of that solution, not the engine driving it. Once you see time this way, many mister lose their drama. The question is no longer how can the future affect the past, but why did we ever assume the past was finalized before it had to be? Time is not a straight line. It's a rule book that only cares about coherence. And the moment you accept that, reality stops looking strange and starts looking brutally efficient. Particles behave like they know the future, and that sentence sounds reckless until you realize it is the least misleading way to describe what the equations and experiments are actually saying. No particle is predicting anything, no intelligence is hiding inside matter, yet the behavior is impossible to explain if you insist that the particle only responds to its immediate past. Something else is going on, and it doesn't care whether it makes us comfortable. We are trained to think locally. A thing moves because it was pushed. A change happens because something hit it a moment earlier. This way of thinking works beautifully at human scales where interactions are slow, noisy, and isolated. But when you strip a system down to its fundamentals, locality stops being a law and becomes an approximation. In carefully controlled experiments, a particle's outcome depends on conditions that are arranged later in time. Change the experimental setup after the particle has already begun its journey, and the final pattern still adjusts as if the particle had access to information it should not have had, not because it knew the future, but because the description of its behavior was never confined to a single moment in time. The mistake is imagining the particle as a tiny traveler carrying instructions as it moves forward. That picture is intuitive and completely wrong. The particle is not a thing moving through time. It is a process that spans the entire experiment. The beginning, the middle, and the end are all part of one indivisible story. When you analyze the math honestly, you don't calculate what happens step by step in time. You calculate which outcomes are consistent with the entire setup. The system behaves as if it is aware of all the constraints, past and future alike, because the solution depends on the whole configuration, not on a sequence of causes. This is why the language of knowing the future keeps sneaking back in. It's not that the particle anticipates, it's that the universe does not privilege the present moment the way our minds do. We experience time as a flow, so we demand that explanations follow that flow. Physics does not share that demand. It allows descriptions that are global in time, descriptions where the beginning and the end jointly determine what is allowed in between. This doesn't violate causality in the way people fear. No usable signal travels backward in time. You cannot send a message to yesterday. The rules are tight. What breaks is not causality itself, but the childish version of it where every effect must be traceable to a single earlier push. What replaces it is a more severe rule, consistency. The outcome must fit all constraints simultaneously. If a future measurement choice imposes a constraint, then earlier behavior must align with it, not because the past changed, but because it was never independently defined. This is deeply unsettling because it suggests that events are not born moment by moment. They are selected as a whole. Reality does not assemble itself frame by frame. It resolves itself all at once. At human scales, this distinction is invisible. The number of constraints is enormous. The past is buried under records. The future is constrained by entropy. Everything looks linear. But when you isolate a system enough to remove those constraints, the underlying structure is exposed, then particles stop acting like objects and start acting like answers to a problem that hasn't been fully stated until the experiment is complete. This reframes what we mean by explanation. Instead of asking what caused this to happen then, the bet. Our question becomes what global conditions made this outcome unavoidable? That shift feels alien because our intuition is wired for survival, not for consistency proofs. Particles don't know the future, but the universe doesn't wait for time to pass before enforcing its rules. It enforces them across time. Once you accept that, the weirdness loses its mysticism and gains something colder and more impressive: inevitability. The outcome is not guided by foresight, but by the refusal of the universe to allow contradictions, even if avoiding them requires behavior that looks, from our limited perspective, like knowledge of what hasn't happened yet. The future isn't being consulted, the present isn't in charge. And the past isn't sacred. There is only the full structure of the experiment. And the demand that the story taken as a whole makes sense. And if that makes particles seem prophetic, that says more about our assumptions than about their behavior. If you think you understand this, you're wrong. And that's not an insult, it's a diagnostic. The moment something feels intuitive, comfortable, or neatly summarized, you've already replaced the phenomenon with a story that fits inside your head. Reality at this level does not fit. The confidence you feel is not understanding, it's compression. And too much compression destroys the signal. Real understanding begins with resistance. It begins when your explanations stop working, when analogies collapse under their own weight, when every familiar picture turns out to be misleading. That discomfort is not a bug in the learning process. It is the only reliable sign that you are still in contact with the truth. At the deepest levels, the universe does not offer mechanisms you can visualize. It offers rules that produce outcomes, and those rules do not care whether your brain finds them reasonable. Our minds evolved to recognize faces, track moving objects, and predict short-term consequences. They did not evolve to grasp a reality where outcomes depend on unasked questions and histories remain undefined until forced. So when someone says they understand what's going on, what they usually mean is that they've found a metaphor they like. Waves, particles, paths, probabilities. These are not explanations, they are linguistic crutches, useful, temporary, and ultimately inadequate. The danger begins when we forget that the equations work, the predictions are flawless, the technology built on them functions with absurd precision, and yet, the moment you try to turn the math into a story about what is really happening, the floor drops out. Every story contradicts some experiment, every picture breaks under scrutiny. That is not a failure of science, it is a failure of intuition. We crave a single coherent narrative where things have properties, events have causes, and time flows obediently forward. But the universe does not owe us that narrative. It only owes us consistency. And consistency at this scale does not look like common sense. The most honest thing you can say about this territory is that it resists understanding in the way we usually define it. You can calculate it, you can predict it, you can use it, but understand, as in visualizing a mechanism that feels right, that privilege is revoked. This is why false confidence is so dangerous here. The moment you think you've got it, you stop asking better questions. You start defending your explanation instead of testing it. You mistake familiarity for truth. History is littered with brilliant people who were wrong for exactly that reason. What survives are not the explanations that feel good, but the ones that refuse to collapse under experiment. Nature is ruthless. It does not negotiate. It does not care how elegant your interpretation is if it produces the wrong answer. And here's the humbling part. Even the people who built the framework knew they didn't understand it in the comforting sense. They knew how to calculate. They knew how to predict. And they knew exactly where intuition failed. That honesty is not weakness. It is intellectual discipline. Confusion, when properly aimed, is a form of precision. To say, I don't know what this means, is not to admit defeat. It is to refuse to lie. It is to draw a hard boundary between what the theory guarantees and what your imagination invents to fill the gaps. The universe at this scale is not asking to be visualized. It is asking to be respected. Respect here means not forcing it into human categories just to feel smart. So if you think you understand this, stop. Interrogate that feeling. Ask what assumptions you're smuggling in. Ask which metaphors you've mistaken for mechanisms. Ask what would break if you changed the question slightly. True engagement with this subject does not end in clarity. It ends in sharper questions and fewer illusions. Understanding, in the comforting sense, is a luxury reserved for simple systems. This is not one of them. And the moment you accept that, the moment you stop demanding that reality makes sense on your terms, you are closer to the truth than anyone who claims they've figured it out. Humans love to ask how far we can go into space, but that question is already wrong. The correct question is, how far does the universe allow us to go? Because space is not empty, it is a battlefield of distance, time, radiation, and energy, and humans are fragile visitors. Let's start with a simple fact that hurts our pride. The universe is not designed for us. No air, no warmth, no forgiveness. Even the nearest star is so far away that our fastest spacecraft would need tens of thousands of years to reach it. And that's not a technology problem. That's a physics problem. Everyone talks about faster engines. No one talks about the real jailer, speed itself. There is a universal speed limit, not because nature is cruel, but because it's consistent. Cross that limit and the equations break. Energy requirements explode toward infinity. Meaning you don't almost reach it. You either obey it or you don't move at all. Now suppose we accept that limit and move as fast as reality allows. Another enemy appears, time. A journey to even nearby stars takes longer than a human life. So who arrives? Not the explorer, but their descendants. And by then, the reason for the journey may already be forgotten. Travel becomes not exploration, but inheritance. Then comes the final insult, energy. To move a human, protect them from radiation, keep them alive, and accelerate them to meaningful cosmic speeds requires absurd amounts of energy. Not a lot, not very difficult. Absurd. At some point, the universe is politely telling us this experiment is no longer worth running. And here's the uncomfortable conclusion. The universe may be filled with galaxies, stars, and planets, but access is not guaranteed. Knowledge travels easily. Light travels freely. But humans? We are slow, delicate, and bound to a small corner of space-time, and that's not a failure. That's a reminder. Our real power may not be how far we travel, but how deeply we understand the place we already occupy, because the universe doesn't care about our dreams, but it does reward those who learn its rules. And once you truly understand the limits, you stop asking childish questions about conquest and start asking adult questions about meaning. The universe is not built for humans, and that is not an opinion. It is a measurable fact written into every law of physics we've ever discovered. The moment you step outside the thin shell of air wrapped around Earth, survival drops from natural to impossible. No oxygen to breathe, no pressure to keep your blood from boiling, no magnetic shield to protect your DNA from being shredded by radiation. Space does not merely ignore us, it actively tries to dismantle us. That alone should force us to rethink how casually we talk about exploring it. On Earth, life evolved inside a narrow comfort zone. Temperature, gravity, chemistry, and time all cooperate just enough for fragile biology to survive. The universe outside that zone does not negotiate. A tiny mistake in pressure or heat kills a human in minutes. A small increase in radiation rewrites cells until cancer becomes inevitable. This isn't bad luck, it's a warning label. The universe isn't hostile in a moral sense, it's simply indifferent. And indifference at cosmic scales is lethal. Distance is the first wall we hit. Space is not big. It is obscenely big. The moon feels far until you realize it's practically next door. Mars is a longer walk, but still inside our neighborhood. Beyond that, the scale becomes ridiculous. The nearest star system is so distant that even light, the fastest thing reality allows, takes years to arrive. Human bodies do not operate on years in a metal box timelines. Bones weaken, muscles decay, minds unravel. Biology was never meant for prolonged isolation in artificial bubbles drifting through nothing. And this is where most optimistic ideas collapse. People imagine better engines, smarter ships, cleaner fuel. But the real limitation is not engineering. It is speed. Speed is expensive. Each small increase demands disproportionately more energy. Push harder, and the universe pushes back harder. Eventually, the math stops being inconvenient and starts being absurd. At some point, you're no longer building a spacecraft, you're trying to bribe reality itself. Even if you could move fast enough, time becomes your enemy. A journey that lasts decades may seem manageable on paper, but humans don't live on paper. They age, they break, they die. Interstellar travel quickly turns into a generational experiment where the people who arrive are not the ones who left and possibly no longer care why the journey began at all. Exploration loses meaning when memory dies before arrival. Then there's radiation, silent, invisible, relentless. Outside Earth's protective field, space is soaked in high-energy particles that slice through tissue and scramble DNA. Shielding helps, but shielding adds mass, and mass demands energy. Again, physics tightens the noose. You can't cheat one problem without feeding another. Every solution creates a new obstacle, and the obstacles stack faster than human ingenuity. Gravity itself betrays us. Our bodies evolved under a very specific gravitational pull. Remove it, and systems start failing. Hearts change shape. Vision degrades. Balance disappears. Put us in stronger gravity, and movement becomes torture. The universe offers almost no environments that sit comfortably within our biological tolerance. We are exquisitely specialized creatures trying to survive in a reality that prefers simplicity over comfort. What makes this hard to accept is not the science, it's the ego. Humans want to believe they are meant to spread everywhere, that intelligence automatically earns access to the cosmos. But intelligence does not override constraints. Knowing the rules does not grant permission to break them. The universe does not reward ambition, it rewards compliance with its laws, and yet this realization is not depressing, it's clarifying. It strips away fantasy and replaces it with honesty. We stop asking childish questions about conquering space and start asking adult questions about understanding it. We learn that sending machines is easy compared to sending flesh. Information travels far better than bodies ever will. Knowledge is the real interstellar traveler. The universe may not be built for humans, but it is built for comprehension. It allows us to observe, calculate, predict, and understand astonishing truths from a fragile planet orbiting an ordinary star. Perhaps that is the real miracle. Not that we can go everywhere, but that we can know so much without leaving home. And once you accept that, your focus shifts. Instead of dreaming about escaping Earth, you start appreciating how rare and delicate this place is. Instead of fantasizing about distant worlds, you realize how extraordinary it is that one world already works. The universe didn't make us explorers of space. It made us explorers of meaning. That may be the hardest limit to accept, but it may also be the most important one. Speed is the real prison. and most people don't realize they've already hit the bars. We talk about space travel as if distance is the enemy, but distance is only scary because of how slowly we are allowed to cross it. The universe doesn't stop us with walls or borders, it stops us with a number, a single unforgiving limit built into reality itself. No matter how advanced our technology becomes, no matter how intelligent we think we are confined by how fast we can move through space. Every dream of reaching distant stars eventually crashes into this limit. You can build bigger engines, burn more fuel, and invent smarter designs, but each step forward costs more than the last. Speed doesn't increase linearly, it punishes ambition. Doubling your speed doesn't double your energy needs, it multiplies each. Push hard enough and the required energy explodes beyond reason. At that point, you're no longer engineering a spacecraft, you're demanding the universe rewrite its own rules for your convenience. The cruel part is that the ultimate speed limit is not negotiable. It isn't a challenge to overcome or a milestone waiting for a breakthrough. It is woven into the structure of space and time themselves. Try to approach it, and mass becomes heavier, time behaves strangely, and energy demands climb toward infinity. There is no clever shortcut, no hidden loophole waiting to be discovered. The equations don't bend for hope. What makes this feel especially frustrating is how close the universe teases us. Light moves fast enough to cross unimaginable distances, carrying images of galaxies billions of years old straight into our telescopes. Information travels effortlessly across the cosmos while bodies remain trapped. We can see almost everything, but touch almost nothing. Vision without access becomes a special kind of torment, awareness without reach. Even if we imagine cruising at a respectable fraction of that ultimate speed, the consequences remain brutal. Time does not stay neutral. For travelers, it slows. For everyone else, it races ahead. A journey that feels manageable inside a ship can erase entire civilizations outside it. You don't return to the world you left. You return to a stranger, or more likely, you never return at all. Speed doesn't just limit travel, it fractures continuity. And then there's the human body, which reacts to high-speed travel not with adaptability but with resistance. Acceleration itself becomes a threat. Too much of it, and organs shift, blood pools, and consciousness fails. To move fast, you must accelerate slowly, which means spending even more time in transit. Speed once again tightens the trap. People often imagine a future where technology solves this problem, but that belief misunderstands the nature of constraints. Technology works inside physics, not outside it. You can optimize, refine, and improve, but you cannot negotiate with fundamental limits. The universe is not impressed by cleverness. It only responds to compliance. This is where optimism quietly turns into fantasy. Faster than light travel sounds exciting because it ignores the cost. It treats speed like a narrative device rather than a physical reality. But speed is not just motion. It is a relationship between energy, mass, and time. Break one, and the others break with it. The prison is perfectly balanced. What's most unsettling is that speed doesn't merely block exploration, it reshapes our understanding of existence. If reaching other stars takes longer than a human lifetime, then interstellar travel stops being personal. It becomes abstract, generational, or purely theoretical. The explorer is replaced by the project, meaning drains away when no one lives long enough to experience the result, and yet this limitation forces an uncomfortable clarity. It reminds us that we are not meant to roam freely across the universe like tourists. We are localized creatures bound to a narrow slice of space-time. Our strength is not in how fast we move, but in how deeply we think. The universe lets us understand speed far better than it lets us use it. Speed is the real prison, not because it stops us from going forward, but because it exposes the boundary between imagination and reality. It shows us where dreams must submit to math. And in that submission, something important happens. We stop chasing impossible distances and start valuing the rare miracle of being here at all. The bars were never made of steel. They were made of numbers. Time betrays the traveler the moment the journey becomes long enough to matter. We imagine space travel as a problem of engines and destinations, but time is the quiet traitor hiding inside every plan. You can survive vacuum with technology, shield radiation with mass, and navigate DI. Stance with precision, but time cannot be sealed outside the spacecraft. It comes with you, distorts around you, and ultimately decides whether the journey has any meaning at all. At first, time seems cooperative. Days pass, routines form, systems run. But stretch the journey into years, then decades, and the betrayal begins. The human body is not a timeless machine. Cells age, bones weaken, muscles decay, and the brain slowly changes its chemistry. Even in perfect conditions, biology is on a countdown. Space does not pause that clock, it accelerates its consequences. Isolation, confinement, and monotony erode the mind long before the destination ever comes into view. The cruel irony is that physics makes this worse, not better. As speed increases, time stops behaving intuitively. For the traveler, clocks slow down. For the universe left behind, they race ahead. This sounds like a gift until you understand the cost. You may arrive feeling younger than expected, but everything you cared about has aged without you. Friends are gone. Cultures have shifted. Languages have evolved. Home becomes a historical concept rather than a place. Time doesn't just pass, it severs continuity. This is where the idea of exploration quietly collapses. Exploration assumes return, comparison, shared experience. But a journey that stretches across generations destroys that structure. The people who leave are not the people who arrive. Purpose erodes when memory does not survive the trip. The mission becomes paperwork handed down through descendants who never chose it. At that point, travel stops being human and becomes procedural. Even if you ignore return and focus only on arrival, time still demands payment. A destination reached after a lifetime is not experienced the same way as one reached after an afternoon. Curiosity dulls, motivation shifts. The emotional reward that justified the journey evaporates long before the journey ends. Time doesn't just delay gratification, it dissolves it. Then there is the biological mismatch. Humans evolved under cycles, day and night seasons, aging alongside a stable environment. Long-duration travel breaks these rhythms. Artificial light replaces stars. Clocks become arbitrary. The mind, deprived of natural temporal anchors, begins to drift. Depression, cognitive decline, and psychological fragmentation are not side effects, they are predictable outcomes. Time, when stripped of context, becomes disorienting rather than informative. People like to imagine solutions, suspended animation, digital minds, extended lifespans. But each solution quietly admits defeat. Freeze the body and you remove the experience. Upload the mind and the traveler is no longer human. Extend life indefinitely and the journey loses urgency and meaning. Every workaround sacrifices the very thing travel was supposed to preserve. What makes time's betrayal so profound is that it doesn't feel like an enemy at first. It feels patient, reasonable. It allows planning, scheduling, optimism. Only later does it reveal the truth that meaning is time-bound. Experiences matter because they happen within a finite window. Stretch that window too far, and experiences lose their sharpness, their urgency, their emotional weight. In the end, time exposes a hard truth about our place in the universe. We are not designed for epics measured in millennia. We are designed for stories measured in decades. Our ambitions may reach the stars, but our significance is anchored to a lifespan that makes such distances impractical. This isn't a failure of imagination. It's a reality check. Time betrays the traveler not out of malice, but out of consistency. It applies the same rules everywhere, without exception. And in doing so, it teaches us something uncomfortable but essential. The universe may be vast, but meaning is local. It lives in moments that cannot be postponed indefinitely. Once you understand that, the obsession with distant futures fade. You stop treating time as something to outrun and start treating it as something to respect. Because the real tragedy is not that we can't travel far enough. It's that we might waste the time we already have chasing destinations that will never arrive while we're still alive to care. Energy costs become absurd the moment ambition outruns realism. At small scales, effort feels proportional to reward. Burn a little fuel, move a little farther. But the universe does not scale politely. Push beyond the familiar and energy stops being a tool and starts becoming a tyrant. Every extra bit of speed, every added layer of protection, every extension of distance demands not just more energy, but wildly more, to the point where the numbers stop feeling physical and start feeling imaginary. This is where most space travel fantasies quietly collapse. We picture sleek ships gliding between stars, but we rarely ask what it actually costs to move mass through space at extreme speeds. Energy is not free, and it is not forgiving. Accelerating a tiny probe is manageable. Accelerating a human-rated spacecraft is a different category of problem entirely. Add life support, radiation shielding, redundancy and safety margins, and the mass balloons. Each added kilogram multiplies the energy required, not just to move, but to keep moving. The trap is exponential growth. Energy requirements don't rise gently, they curve upward sharply, then violently. At first the curve looks manageable, then it turns steep, then it goes vertical. Beyond that point, the concept of more fuel stops making sense. You would need energy outputs comparable to stars to push a single vehicle to meaningful interstellar speeds, not to explore the galaxy, just to reach the next star within a human-relevant time frame. And energy is never isolated. Producing it has costs, storing it has costs, controlling it safely has costs. High-energy systems generate heat that must be removed, radiation that must be contained, and risks that multiply with scale. A machine powerful enough to accelerate a crewed ship to extreme speeds becomes, by necessity, a machine that can easily destroy itself. Stability becomes as hard as propulsion. This leads to a brutal reality. Space travel does not fail because we lack imagination. It fails because imagination ignores bookkeeping. Physics keeps perfect accounts. Every joule must come from somewhere. Every inefficiency compounds. You can't cheat by being clever. Cleverness just shifts where the bill arrives. Eventually, it arrives in full, even slowing down costs energy. You don't just spend energy to leave, you spend it again to stop. Momentum doesn't care about your plans. A ship arriving at high speed must dump that energy somewhere, and space offers very few safe places to put it. The faster you go, the harder it is to arrive intact. The universe charges you twice, once for ambition and once for control. This absurdity forces an uncomfortable comparison. On Earth, the energy required to move people across continents feels trivial. Planes, ships, and rockets make distance seem conquered. But that familiarity hides how special our situation is. Earth gives us gravity wells, atmospheres, and abundant energy sources. Strip those away, and movement becomes brutally expensive. Space removes all the subsidies we take for granted. People often propose breakthroughs, perfect reactors, exotic fuels, revolutionary engines. But even perfect efficiency doesn't save you from scale. Efficiency reduces waste, it doesn't eliminate demand. When the demand itself becomes astronomical, perfection barely moves the needle. The problem isn't inefficiency, it's magnitude. At some point, energy costs stop being a technical challenge and become a philosophical one. Why spend stellar amounts of energy to move a handful of fragile organisms across a void that offers no guarantee of return? The universe doesn't forbid it explicitly. It simply makes it irrational. The cost-benefit analysis collapses under its own weight. This is not pessimism. It is clarity. It tells us where physical exploration makes sense and where it doesn't. It explains why robotic probes outperform crewed missions at extreme distances, and why information travels farther than bodies ever will. Data is light. Humans are heavy. Energy costs become absurd as a way of drawing a boundary. Not a wall, but a curve that steepens until progress becomes indistinguishable from fantasy. Understanding that curve doesn't diminish humanity, it refines it. It forces us to choose battles that matter and investments that pay off. The universe is not telling us to stop dreaming. It is telling us to count the cost. And when the numbers grow so large that they swallow the dream itself, wisdom is knowing when to change the dream rather than bankrupt reality trying to fulfill it. The final irony is that the universe may be overflowing with destinations, yet almost none of them are meant to be reached by us. After all the equations, all the ambition, all the technological bravado, we arrive at a quiet, unsettling realization. The cosmos is not limited by lack of wonders, but by access. It shows us everything and offers us almost nothing to touch. We look up and see galaxies by the billions, stars by the trillions, planets scattered like dust. The scale invites conquest, or at least visitation. But the same laws that allow us to see so far also prevent us from going far. Light crosses the universe with ease, matter does not. Awareness travels freely, bodies remain trapped. The universe reveals itself generously, then locks the door. This is the opposite of what intuition promises. Intelligence feels like a passport. We assume that understanding earns permission. But the universe does not trade access for insight. It hands us knowledge without mobility, vision without reach. The smarter we become, the clearer the confinement appears. Progress doesn't open the cage, it illuminates the bars. There is a deeper irony hiding here. The more we learn about the universe, the more local we realize our lives must be. Grand cosmic narratives collapse into fragile human timelines. Interstellar empires turn into logistical absurdities. Colonizing the stars sounds heroic until the numbers drain it of romance. The future becomes less about expansion and more about endurance. What makes this hard to accept is that limitation feels like failure. We are conditioned to believe that every boundary exists to be broken. But some boundaries are not challenges, they are definitions. They tell you what kind of universe you live in. This one allows understanding without domination, curiosity without conquest. That is not a flaw. It is a feature the irony sharpens when you consider where meaning actually lives. It does not scale with distance. It scales with experience. A planet across the galaxy is emotionally irrelevant compared to a moment here that changes a life. The universe gives us infinite scenery, but meaning remains stubbornly finite. We are not built to care about everything, only about what fits inside a human lifespan, and yet we keep reaching outward, hoping that distance itself will provide significance. But distance is empty. It is just more space between events that matter. The universe may be vast, but vastness alone is not purpose. Purpose emerges from interaction, from consequences that unfold within time frames we can feel. This is where the final irony becomes unavoidable. The same laws that prevent us from roaming the cosmos are the laws that make our existence precious. Finiteness creates urgency, limits create focus. If we could go anywhere at any time, nothing would matter very much. Scarcity is not just a constraint, it is a source of value. The universe does not owe us access to its farthest corners. It has already given us something far rarer, the ability to comprehend it from a small, stable platform where life can persist long. Enough to ask questions. We are not cosmic tourists, we are cosmic witnesses. That role may sound smaller, but it is not. To understand a universe you cannot fully explore is a profound position. It means your importance is not measured by territory, but by insight. Not by how far you travel, but by how deeply you see. The final irony, then, is not that we are trapped on one planet. It is that this trap is precisely what allows consciousness, culture, science, and meaning to exist at all. The universe closes the door to endless expansion, then hands us a window wide enough to see almost everything. And maybe that is the point, not to go everywhere, but to understand enough of what we can see to live wisely where we are.
Richard Feynman read fewer textbooks than his classmates. He took fewer notes. He skipped entire chapters. His peers spent 12 hours covering material he finished in 4. Yet he understood physics at a depth that won him a Nobel Prize. When colleagues struggled to explain quantum mechanics to undergraduates, Feynman made it simple. When NASA needed someone to find what killed 7 astronauts, they called him. When the world's top physicists gathered, they listened when he spoke. The paradox destroys everything schools taught you about reading. Because Feynman wasn't reading, he was reconstructing. And the difference between these two actions explains why you finish books but can't use what you read. The traditional approach seems logical. Open to page 1, read linearly, highlight important passages, take notes in margins, review before tests. Schools have taught this method for over a century. Millions of students follow it religiously. Yet something breaks in the process. You finish the book. You feel accomplished. The highlighted sections glow with importance. The notes stack up in neat files. But 3 weeks later, someone asks you to explain the core concept, and you freeze. The information vanished. You consumed 300 pages but retained almost nothing usable. This isn't a memory problem, it's a method problem. Schools confuse consumption with learning because consumption is measurable. You can track pages read, chapters completed, notes taken. But understanding, that's invisible. That's why they don't teach it. Feynman discovered the problem early in his academic career. At MIT in the late 1930s, he watched peers drown in physics textbooks. They read everything, highlighted everything, remembered nothing deeply. While preparing for his graduate qualifier exams at Princeton, he noticed a pattern. Students who covered the most material understood it the least. Students who memorized formulas couldn't derive them. Students with perfect notes couldn't apply concepts to new problems. As he later wrote in, "Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman," there's a crucial difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. Most reading produces the first. His method forced the second. The technique seemed inefficient at first. While his roommate covered 30 pages per night, Feynman might finish 10. But when exam time came, the roommate struggled to apply concepts. Feynman rebuilt entire theories from first principles. The difference wasn't intelligence, it wasn't speed, it was method. And it started with something schools never teach, reading with a target, not a syllabus. To understand how this worked, we need to see what he actually did. And it began before he even opened a book. Princeton, 1940. Feynman faces a wall of physics textbooks for his doctoral work. Most graduate students begin with Chapter 1 and march forward dutifully. Feynman does something that seems backward. He starts with a problem. A specific question he cannot answer. Before touching any textbook, he writes at the top of a blank page, "Why does the Dirac equation predict antimatter?" Only then does he hunt for relevant sections. He ignores introductions that review basic concepts he already knows, skips chapters on topics he mastered at MIT, targets exactly what he needs to answer his question, nothing more. His classmates read for coverage. Feynman reads for answers. This inversion changes everything at the cognitive level. When you open a textbook to chapter 1, because the syllabus demands it, your brain has no anchor point. The information floats by without connecting to anything meaningful. You're in passive reception mode, letting words wash over you. But when you start with a specific question, a genuine gap in your understanding, your brain activates differently. It searches for patterns, tests each new piece of information against your question, accepts what helps, discards what doesn't, maintains focus because you're hunting, not consuming. As Feynman explained in his lectures at Caltech years later, you can know the name of a bird in all the languages of the world, but when you're finished, you'll know absolutely nothing whatever about the bird. So let's look at the bird and see what it's doing. That's what counts. The same applies to reading. You can know all the chapter titles, all the key terms, all the highlighted passages. But if you can't rebuild the concept without looking, you don't know it. This principle applies directly today when you're reading technical documentation for AWS certification, studying business frameworks from good to great, or learning React from online tutorials. Before opening the resource, write the specific question. How does React's virtual DOM actually improve performance? Or, what makes Southwest Airlines profitable when other airlines fail? Then read only to answer that question. Skip the rest. This prevents the most common, self-learning trap of our era, tutorial hell. You're not trying to complete the course or finish the book. You're trying to eliminate one specific gap in your knowledge. But identifying the question was just the first step. What Feynman did next seemed even more wasteful. After reading 3 pages about the Dirac equation, Feynman closed the textbook, didn't highlight, didn't underline, didn't take notes in the margins, closed it completely. Then he turned to a blank page in his notebook and attempted to explain the concept in his own words, from memory, without looking back. The first attempt failed. He remembered the terminology but couldn't rebuild the logic. The equations appeared, but their derivation vanished. The conclusion made sense, but the path to it disappeared. Most students would reopen the book and reread everything, highlighting more passages the second time. Feynman did something more surgical. He noted exactly where his explanation broke down. I can't explain why the equation needs to be relativistic, or I don't understand how spin emerges from the math. Then he reopened the book, read only that specific section, sometimes just one paragraph, closed it again, and tried once more to reconstruct the entire explanation. He repeated this cycle until he could teach the concept to an empty room without any reference material. His roommate thought he was wasting time. Look at the contrast in their textbooks after one semester. The roommates, covered in neon highlighter, margins stuffed with notes, every important passage marked with stars and exclamation points. Feynman's, nearly pristine, maybe a dozen brief annotations total. But here's what the physical evidence couldn't show. The roommate's notes were decorations. They created an illusion of learning. When tested, he could recite passages but not explain principles. He knew what the book said, but not what it meant. Feynman's blank reconstructions were diagnostics. They revealed exactly what he didn't understand. No hiding. No false confidence. Why does this work when highlighting fails? Because your brain tricks you with familiarity. When you highlight a passage, your brain registers recognition. I know this. I marked it. It's important. But familiarity is not understanding. It's just pattern recognition. You can recognize someone's face without knowing their name. You can recognize a physics equation without understanding its derivation. You can recognize a business framework without being able to apply it. Recognition is passive. Understanding is active. Feynman eliminated recognition by forcing reconstruction. When you close the book and face a blank page, there's nowhere to hide. Either you can rebuild the concept, or you can't. Either you understand the logic, or you memorize the conclusion. The blank page doesn't lie. As he later explained when describing his approach to physics problems, "What I cannot create, I do not understand." The same applies to reading. What you cannot reconstruct, you do not understand. This principle solves the biggest problem in modern self-learning: the gap between consuming content and building competence. You watch a YouTube tutorial on Python. You follow along. The code makes sense while the instructor explains it. You feel like you're learning, but the next day you face a blank text editor and freeze. Nothing comes. You consume the tutorial, but you can't reconstruct the logic. The solution is brutal, but effective. After watching each major section, close the video. Open a blank file. Try to write the code from memory. When you fail, and you will fail, note exactly where you got stuck. Rewatch only that 30-second segment. Close it. Try again. This is how you transform passive watching into active understanding. But Feynman added another layer that most people skip entirely. Los Alamos, 1943. The Manhattan Project assembles the world's top physicists. Security protocols prevent them from explaining their work to outsiders. Feynman develops a habit. Late at night, he stands at a blackboard in an empty room and teaches. The room is empty, but he explains quantum mechanics, bomb design calculations, uranium enrichment. As if presenting to undergraduates who know nothing, he uses simple language, draws diagrams, rebuilds equations from scratch. When he stumbles over an explanation, he stops, marks the concept, returns to it the next day. His colleagues think he's rehearsing lectures. They're wrong. He's testing understanding. Because here's what Feynman discovered. You can fool yourself with notes. You can fool yourself with recognition. But you cannot fool yourself when teaching. Teaching forces you to organize knowledge, anticipate questions, simplify without losing accuracy, and expose every gap in your logic. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it deeply. And if you can't explain it to someone who knows nothing, you've memorized without comprehending. This became his ultimate diagnostic tool. Years later, when developing the Feynman lectures on physics, he insisted on teaching freshman undergraduates, not graduate students. Graduate students would nod along, filling in gaps with their existing knowledge. Freshmen would look confused at the exact points where Feynman's explanation failed. Their confusion was a gift. It showed him precisely what he hadn't made clear. As he wrote in the preface to those lectures, "I don't believe I can really do a good job of explaining anything unless I can explain it to a freshman." The same principle applies when you're studying cloud architecture, learning behavioral psychology, or mastering SQL queries. After reading a chapter, don't test yourself with multiple choice questions. Those test recognition. Instead, open a voice memo app and explain the concept aloud, as if teaching someone who's never heard of it. Use analogies, draw connections, simplify without dumbing down. The exact moments you hesitate, fumble for words, or resort to jargon, those are your knowledge gaps, not the sections you forgot, the sections you thought you understood but can't articulate. That's the difference between recognition and reconstruction. The first lets you pass tests. The second lets you solve real problems. But there was one more piece to Feynman's system that made everything else possible. Caltech, 1960s. Feynman maintains a notebook with an unusual title, Notebook of Things I Don't Know About. Not a record of what he learned, a record of what he hadn't learned yet. Inside, lists of concepts he couldn't explain, problems he couldn't solve, questions he couldn't answer. Some entries stay for months, others get crossed off after targeted reading. The notebook isn't comprehensive. It doesn't try to cover all of physics. It maps his ignorance. And that map becomes his reading curriculum. Most people read to cover material. Feynman read to eliminate specific ignorance. His classmates would. Read Introduction to Quantum Mechanics from cover to cover, because that's what comprehensive students do. Feynman would skip to chapter 7, because that's where his notebook said he didn't understand commutation relations. He'd read those 12 pages, test himself through reconstruction. If successful, cross it off the list. If unsuccessful, identify the prerequisite he was missing and hunt for that. His reading wasn't linear, it was surgical. This approach contradicted everything schools taught. Professors assigned textbooks to be read completely, in order, without skipping. Feynman treated textbooks like reference databases. You don't read databases cover to cover. You query them for specific information. The goal isn't coverage. The goal is targeted elimination of ignorance. As he later advised students, study hard what interests you the most in the most undisciplined, irreverent, and original manner possible. The efficiency gain was massive. While classmates spent equal time on concepts they already understood and concepts they didn't, Feynman allocated 0 time to the first category and all his time to the second. While they read defensively, covering everything in case it appeared on the exam, he read offensively, attacking only his weak points. By the time they finished one comprehensive textbook, he'd solved 12 specific gaps using 7 different sources. His knowledge became deeper but more targeted. Not encyclopedic. Applicable. This is how you learn in the age of infinite content. You can't read everything. Attempting to read everything paralyzes you, but you can identify your ignorance. Maintain your own things I don't understand list. Maybe it's, I don't know how JWT authentication actually works, or I don't understand why some companies scale and others don't, or I can't explain why the Fed raising interest rates affects stock prices. That list becomes your curriculum. Read only to eliminate items from it. Skip everything else without guilt. Clarity about your gaps is more valuable than comprehensive coverage of material you'll forget. When you combine these 4 elements, targeted questioning before reading, forced reconstruction after reading, teaching as a diagnostic, and gap-focused curriculum, you get something schools never teach: true comprehension. This is why Feynman could Richard Feynman read fewer textbooks than his classmates. He took fewer notes. He skipped entire chapters. His peers spent 12 hours covering material he finished in 4. Yet he understood physics at a depth that won him a Nobel Prize. When colleagues struggled to explain quantum mechanics to undergraduates, Feynman made it simple. When NASA needed someone to find what killed 7 astronauts, they called him. When the world's top physicists gathered, they listened when he spoke. The paradox destroys everything schools taught you about reading. Because Feynman wasn't reading, he was reconstructing. And the difference between these 2 actions explains why you finish books but can't use what you read. The traditional approach seems logical. Open to page 1, read linearly, highlight important passages, take notes in margins, review before tests. Schools have taught this method for over a century. Millions of students follow it religiously. Yet something breaks in the process. You finish the book. You feel accomplished. The highlighted sections glow with importance. The notes stack up in neat files. But 3 weeks later, someone asks you to explain the core concept, and you freeze. The information vanished. You consumed 300 pages but retained almost nothing usable. This isn't a memory problem, it's a method problem. Schools confuse consumption with learning because consumption is measurable. You can track pages read, chapters completed, notes taken, but understanding, that's invisible. That's why they don't teach it. Feynman discovered the problem early in his academic career. At MIT in the late 1930s, he watched peers drown in physics textbooks. They read everything, highlighted everything, remembered nothing deeply. While preparing for his graduate qualifier exams at Princeton, he noticed a pattern. Students who covered the most material understood it the least. Students who memorized formulas couldn't derive them. Students with perfect notes couldn't apply concepts to new problems. As he later wrote in, "Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman," there's a crucial difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. Most reading produces the first. His method forced the second. The technique seemed inefficient.
But one of them is heavy, filled with obligations, with shoulds, with work you have to do whether you want to or not. Work that drains you. Work that feels like burden. Work that steals your life. Hold up the other one. This one is light, filled with things you choose, with wants, with work you do because it interests you, work that energizes you, work that feels like freedom, work that enriches your life. Should put them down as most people spend their entire lives carrying the heavy briefcase. They call it responsibility. They call it adulting. They call it, that's just how life is. And they're exhausted, burned out, resentful, dreaming of retirement when they can finally stop carrying the weight. Far direct address, but there's a different way. A way Richard Feynman discovered. A way where work becomes optional. Not because you're rich, not because you don't work, but because you've applied a single rule that transforms your relationship with work. A rule so simple it sounds too easy to work, but so powerful that once you apply it, you'll never feel trapped by work again. Loon in Fief today, I'm going to reveal that rule, the freedom rule that makes work optional. And I'm going to show you exactly how to apply it to your life, starting immediately. Because the difference between carrying the heavy briefcase and the light one isn't what you do. It's how you think about what you do. And that can change today, right now, this moment. I'll walk across stage. Let me start with a story. This story reveals everything about the freedom rule. It's 1951. Feynman is at Cornell. He's depressed. Seriously depressed. Not sad, not down. Clinically depressed to the point where he's considering leaving physics entirely. Why? Because work has become work. Heavy. Obligatory. Something he has to do instead of wants to do. Vacker explained the situation. He's just won recognition for his war work. He has tenure, he has expectations. He has responsibilities. People expect him to do important physics, solve important problems, publish important papers. And the moment work became something he had to do, something with expectations and obligations, it became unbearable. The joy disappeared. The curiosity died. Work became work. A share his crisis hour, he sits in his office, staring at physics problems, feeling nothing, no interest, no drive, just obligation. I should work on this. I'm supposed to solve this. People expect me to do this? Expected. The language of obligation. The language of the heavy briefcase, and he can't do it. He's paralyzed. Not by lack of ability, by lack of freedom. Work has become prison. The turning point then something happens. He's in the cafeteria. A student throws a plate in the air. The plate wobbles as it spins. And Feynman notices something interesting about the wobble. And for the first time in months, he feels curious. Interested. Not because he should study the wobble. Not because anyone expects him to. But because it's interesting. Share what he does, so he goes to his office. And he works on the wobbling plate. Just for fun. Just because it interests him. No expectations. No obligations. No should. And the depression lifts. Work becomes play again. Physics becomes exciting again. He's free again. Reveal what happens and not because the work changed, but because his relationship to the work changed. He stopped doing what he should do and started doing what he wanted to do. He applied the freedom rule, and work became optional, not in the sense that he stopped working, but in the sense that work became choice instead of obligation. Arthur make the point. That's the freedom rule. That's the thing that makes work optional. And once you understand it, once you really get it, your entire relationship with work transforms. Direct statement, here's the rule. Never do anything you don't want to do. For pause, let that land wait. That sounds irresponsible, impractical, impossible. How can you never do anything you don't want to do? Life has obligations, bills to pay, responsibilities to meet, things you have to do whether you want to or not. Address the objection. But here's what Feynman understood. Here's the deep truth that makes this rule actually work. You're already choosing everything you do. Right now. Today. Every have to is actually a choice. Every obligation is something you're choosing to fulfill. Every should is something you're deciding to do. Farn, make it concretier. You don't have to go to work. You're choosing to go to work because you want the money more than you want to skip work. That's a choice, your choice. You don't have to pay your bills. You're choosing to pay your bills because you want electricity and shelter more than you want to keep the money. That's a choice. Your choice. You don't have to do anything. You're choosing to do everything. The question is, are you aware you're choosing? Or are you pretending you have no choice? Asn't present the distinction. That's the distinction. That's what makes work optional. When you pretend you have no choice, when you say, I have to do this. Work is heavy. It's obligation. It's burden. It's prison. But when you acknowledge you're choosing, when you say, I'm choosing to do this, work becomes light. It's freedom. It's agency. It's optional. Pause, same work, same tasks, different relationship to it, different experience of it. Asher shared deeper explanation. So let me show you exactly how this works. Why acknowledging choice transforms everything. When you say, I have to do this, you're in victim mode. Something external is forcing you. You have no power. You're trapped. You're at the mercy of circumstances. Make the impact clear. And that feels terrible. That creates resentment. That drains energy. That makes work feel like burden. you're doing the thing, but you're fighting it internally. Part of you is saying, I don't want to do this. I shouldn't have to do this. This isn't fair. That internal resistance is what makes work heavy. Show the alternative, but when you say, I'm choosing to do this, you're in agent mode. You're making a decision. You have power. You're free. You're acting according to your values. Fake continue, and that feels completely different. Even if the task is exactly the same, even if it's something you don't particularly enjoy, the experience is transformed because you're not fighting it. You're not resenting it. You're doing it as a conscious choice aligned with what you value. Give concrete example. Let's make this concrete. You're going to work. Same commute. Same job, same tasks. Mindset 1, I have to go to work. I have no choice. I'm trapped. I'd rather be doing something else, but I can't. How does that feel? Heavy, resentful, draining. Alternative mindset 2, I'm choosing to go to work because I value having money to support my family. I'm choosing this over sleeping in because financial security matters to me. This is my choice. How does that feel? Lighter, empowered, energizing. Make the point. Same work, same commute.
Same job.
Different relationship to it, different experience of it. The work didn't become optional in the sense that you stopped doing it. The work became optional in the sense that you're choosing it. And choice is freedom. Share Feynman's application. This is what Feynman did after his depression. He made everything optional, everything a choice. He'd get an invitation to give a lecture, and he'd ask himself, do I want to do this? Not should I. Not am I supposed to. Do I want to? If yes, he'd do it. If no, he'd decline. Simple. Fred continues. Someone would ask him to serve on a committee. Do I want to do this? No. Decline. Someone would offer him a prestigious position. Do I want to do this? No. Decline. Someone would present him with an interesting physics problem. Do I want to do this? Yes. Accept. Make the point of as everything became optional, everything became choice. He only did what he wanted to do. And you know what? He was more productive, more creative, more successful. Because when you only do what you want to do, you have energy, you have enthusiasm, you have engagement. Address the objection. Now, some of you are thinking, that's fine for Feynman. He was a Nobel Prize winner. He had freedom. He could say no to things I can't. I have to do things I don't want to do. Fei answer directly if no. You're choosing to do things you've decided you should do. There's a difference. Let me show you how to apply this rule even when you think you can't. Even when you think you have to do something. Present the framework. When you encounter something you have to do, use this process. Step 1. Acknowledge it's a choice. I'm choosing to do this instead of I have to do this. And step 2, identify why you're choosing it. I'm choosing this because what do you value that makes this choice worthwhile? Step 3, decide if that reason is worth it. Is what you're getting from this choice worth what you're giving up? Make it concrete with example. You have to attend a boring meeting at work. Let's apply the process. Step 1, I'm choosing to attend this meeting. Step 2, I'm choosing this because I value keeping my job, and attending meetings is part of keeping my job, and keeping my job gives me income that supports my family. Or step 3, is that worth it? Is sitting through this boring meeting worth the income that supports my family? Yes. Okay. Then I choose this. 6, show the transformation. This year is now you're in the meeting, but you're not resentful. You're not thinking, I have to be here. This is terrible. I'm trapped. You're thinking, I'm choosing to be here. This is part of how I support my family. That's worth it to me. Make the point. Same meeting, same boredom, different experience, because you've shifted from victim mode, I have to agent mode, I'm choosing to. Fav, give another example. You have to do your taxes. Let's apply the process. Step 1, I'm choosing to do my taxes. Step 2, I'm choosing this because I value not going to prison and not having my wages garnished, and doing my taxes prevents those outcomes. Step 3, is that worth it? Is spending a few hours on taxes worth avoiding prison and wage garnishment? Yes, absolutely. I choose this. 5, show the shift. Now you're doing your taxes. But you're not thinking, this is terrible. I hate this. Why do I have to do this? You're thinking, I'm choosing to do this because I value freedom and financial stability. This is worth a few hours of my time. Here, make the deeper point to see what happened. The task didn't change. Taxes are still taxes, but boring meetings are still boring. But your relationship to the task changed. from obligation to choice, from burden to agency, from heavy to light. Asik present the radical application. Now let me show you the radical application of this rule. This is where it gets really powerful. Sometimes, when you apply this process, you'll realize, actually, no, this isn't worth it. I don't want to do this. The cost is higher than the benefit. Ras continue, and then you have a real choice. You can stop doing it. You can say no. You can find a different way. Let's give example. You're working a job you hate. You've been telling yourself, I have to do this job. I have no choice. I'm trapped. Apply the process. Step 1, I'm choosing to work this job. Step 2, I'm choosing this because I value the income, the health insurance, the retirement benefits. Step 3, is this worth it? At the turning point, and maybe you realize, no, actually, this isn't worth it. The income isn't worth the misery. The benefits aren't worth hating every day. The security isn't worth feeling dead inside. What happens next are now you have real clarity. You're not trapped. You're choosing. And you're choosing something that's not worth it to you, so you can make a different choice. Find a different job, change careers, start a business, reduce expenses, whatever. But the key is you're not trapped. You were never trapped. You were choosing. And now you're aware of it, so you can choose differently. Share Feynman example. Feynman did this multiple times. He'd realize he was doing things that weren't worth it to him. Things he'd said yes to out of obligation or expectation. And he'd stop. He'd walk away. He'd say no. Foster's specific example, he was offered the position of head of the physics department at Caltech. Prestigious, important, well paid. He applied the process. Do I want to do this? What would I value about this? The prestige, the power, the money. And he realized none of that is worth the administrative work. None of that is worth the meetings in politics and bureaucracy. So he said no, turned it down, stayed a regular professor, kept his freedom. I've make the point said most people would have said, I have to accept this. It's too good to turn down. People expect me to say yes. But Feynman asked, do I want this? Is it worth it to me? And when the answer was no, he said no, because work is optional. Everything is optional. It's all choice. Aishi present the deeper principle. Here's the deeper principle that makes this work. You can't control what situations you face, but you can always control how you relate to those situations. Acts explain life will present you with constraints, bills to pay, responsibilities to meet, circumstances to navigate. You can't make all of that disappear, but you can choose how you think about it. Victim or agent, trapped or choosing. Have to or want to, make the distinction, two people in identical situations. Same job, same bills, same responsibilities. Person 1, I have to do all this, I'm trapped, I have no choice, life is burden. Person 2, I'm choosing all this. These are my values expressed through my choices. I'm free. F.A. asked the question, who has a better experience? Who feels more energized? Who's carrying the heavy briefcase and who's carrying the light one? Ars has answer person 2. Not because their situation is different, but because their relationship to the situation is different. Share the transformation. Let me tell you about someone who applied this. Call him Marcus. Marcus worked in corporate finance, hated it, dreaded Monday mornings, lived for weekends, counted down to retirement, classic heavy briefcase. I have to do this job. I have to pay my mortgage. I have to support my family. I'm trapped. The change then he learned about Feynman's freedom rule. And he tried something. He started applying the process. I'm choosing to work this job. I'm choosing to pay this mortgage. I'm choosing to support my family in this way. A why. What did he value about these choices? His realization. And he realized he valued financial security. He valued providing for his family. He valued the lifestyle his income enabled. Were those worth the job he didn't love? He thought about it. Really thought about it. Ours his decision, and he decided yes, for now. Supporting his family in this way was worth doing work he didn't love. That was his choice, his values, his decision. As the transformation, and something shifted. Monday mornings weren't quite as dreadful. The work wasn't quite as heavy, because he wasn't a victim anymore. He was making a choice aligned with his values. The deeper change, but also, and this is important, because he'd acknowledged it was a choice, he stayed open to other choices. He wasn't locked in. He wasn't trapped. He was choosing this for now, but he could choose differently later. What happened next? 2 years later, That's what he did. He found a way to reduce expenses, build up savings, and transition to work he genuinely enjoyed. Same income, but work he actually wanted to do. And I can make the point none of that would have happened if he'd stayed in victim mode. I have to do this. I'm trapped. That mindset keeps you stuck. But I'm choosing this for now, and I can choose differently later. That mindset opens possibilities. That mindset creates freedom. If I address another application, let me show you another application. This one is about relationships. You're in a relationship. And there are things about it that are difficult. Things you don't particularly enjoy. Things you'd rather not deal with. The victim mindset, I have to deal with this. I'm stuck with this person. I have no choice. How does that feel? Resentful, trapped. Heavy. The freedom mindset. I'm choosing to stay in this relationship. I'm choosing to work through these difficulties because I value this person and what we have together more than I value avoiding these difficulties. How does that feel? Empowered, committed, light. Feynman make the distinction, same relationship, same difficulties, different experience, because one is choice and one is obligation. The profound impact, and here's what's powerful, when you acknowledge you're choosing the relationship, you stop resenting it. You stop feeling trapped. You show up differently, you engage differently, and often the relationship itself improves. Because you're no longer bringing resentment and victimhood into it. You're bringing choice and agency. Present the practices. So here's the practice. Here's how to make work optional. How to carry the light briefcase instead of the heavy one. Every time you catch yourself thinking, I have to do this, stop. Replace it with, I'm choosing to do this because. Fill in the because. What do you value that makes this choice worthwhile? Ask and give the questions. If you can fill it in, if you can identify what you value about this choice, then own it. You're choosing this. It's not obligation. It's expression of your values through choice. If you can't fill it in, if you realize you're only doing it out of obligation or expectation or habit, then you have information. Maybe this isn't worth it. Maybe you can make a different choice. Share the categories. Let me give you the categories where this applies. Work. I'm choosing this job because I value the income and what it provides. Relationships. I'm choosing this relationship because I value this person and what we have together. Responsibilities. I'm choosing to fulfill this responsibility because I value being reliable and trustworthy. Health. I'm choosing to exercise because I value energy and longevity more than I value comfort right now. Make the point, everything is choice. Everything is optional. The question is, are you aware you're choosing? And are your choices aligned with what you actually value? Share the paradox. Here's the paradox: when you make everything optional, when you acknowledge everything is choice, you often end up doing more, not less. Why? Because you have energy, you have engagement. You're not dragging yourself through obligations. You're choosing actions aligned with your values. To give Feynman an example, when Feynman made work optional, he only did what he wanted to do. And he worked harder and accomplished more than most people who felt obligated to work. Because his work was choice, was play, was freedom, was expression of his curiosity. Abraham make the universal point. That's available to you too. That transformation, that freedom, that experience of work becoming optional, not by quitting everything, not by becoming irresponsible, but by acknowledging that everything you do is already your choice, and owning that choice, and aligning your choices with your values. Fry address final objection, one final objection. But what if I genuinely don't want to do something but I have to for survival? Like work a terrible job to pay rent.
Answer.
First, even then, it's a choice. You're choosing survival. You're choosing shelter. Those are values. Own that choice. I'm choosing this terrible job because I value having a place to live. That's worth it to me right now. Here's on continue second. Acknowledge it's a choice for now, not forever. I'm choosing this for now while I figure out alternatives. That keeps you in agent mode. That keeps you looking for better options. That keeps you free even in difficult circumstances. Final point, the moment you say, I have to and I'll always have to, that's when you're truly trapped. Not by circumstances, by your mindset, by your belief that you have no choice. But you always have choice. Even if it's just choosing how you relate to circumstances, you can't immediately change. I walk to center. So here's the freedom rule that makes work optional: never do anything you don't want to do. Not by avoiding responsibility, but by acknowledging that everything you do is already your choice, and owning that choice, and aligning your choices with your values. A work make it practical, P. Starting today, catch yourself every time you say, I have to. Replace it with, I'm choosing to. Fill in why. What do you value about this choice? Shake the promise to do this consistently, and work becomes optional. Not in the sense that you stop working, but in the sense that work becomes choice instead of obligation. The briefcase doesn't get heavier or lighter based on what's in it. It gets heavier or lighter based on whether you're carrying it as burden or carrying it as choice. Final statement. You're already carrying it. You're already doing the work. You're already meeting the responsibilities. The only question is, will you carry it as victim or as agent? As trap or as choice? As heavy or as light?
Choose light. Choose freedom.
Choose agency. Make work optional by acknowledging you're already choosing it. Thank you. And if you want to understand more about how Feynman lived with radical freedom, how he made every part of his life optional through conscious choice, do me a favor. Like this video and subscribe to the Mind of Richard Feynman channel. We're exploring how to live with agency, with choice, with freedom, not by escaping responsibility, but by owning it. Join us. Let's choose freedom together. See you in the next one.
You think you know how vision works. You open your eyes, the world floods in, and there it is. Reality, crisp and clear. You see a face, a wall, a car. It feels immediate, it feels simple, but you are completely wrong. What you think is a passive act of seeing is actually a computational miracle so complex it makes quantum mechanics look like a game of tic-tac-toe. The fact that you can see anything at all is, statistically speaking, ridiculous. You aren't seeing objects. You are decoding a chaotic, violent mess of invisible vibrations that are hammering against your face from every possible angle, all at once. And somehow, your brain doesn't explode. Imagine you are sitting by the side of a swimming pool. It's a hot day, crowded. A dozen people dive in at the same time. Kids are splashing in the shallow end. Someone is doing laps. A lifeguard throws a float. The surface of the water is a disaster zone. It's a choppy, chaotic mixture of waves crashing into waves, ripples bouncing off the walls, reflections colliding with disturbances. It looks like random noise. But now, imagine a super intelligent insect sitting in the very corner of that pool, just floating on the surface tension. This bug is blind. It cannot see the swimmers. It cannot see the diving board. All it can feel is the water bobbing up and down right where it is sitting. Here is where it gets insane. If that insect is clever enough, and we are talking about a level of cleverness that rivals a supercomputer, it could theoretically analyze the rhythm of those bumps and jiggles in the corner and reconstruct exactly who jumped in, where they jumped, how big they were, and what kind of swimsuit they were wearing. Just by feeling the choppiness in one tiny corner, it could mathematically work backward to build a perfect 3D image of the entire pool. That sounds impossible, doesn't it? Calculating the position of a dozen swimmers just by the way the water laps against a concrete wall. That is exactly what your eyes are doing right now. The light filling this room behaves exactly like that swimming pool, except it is not water, and it is not two-dimensional. It is a three-dimensional soup of waves. Light waves are bouncing off every object in the room, the chair, the floor, your hand, the wall behind you. They are scattering in every conceivable direction, mixing together, crossing paths, and creating a field of electromagnetic choppiness that is infinitely more complex than any swimming pool. And you? You have two tiny instruments, little holes about 1/8 of an inch wide that catch a microscopic sample of this chaos. Your eye is that super intelligent bug. It takes this jumbled mess of shaking light waves that enter through the pupil and instantly disentangles them. It figures out that this specific ripple came from the lamp, and that specific wobble came from the reflection on the table. It separates the waves that bounced off a red apple from the waves that came from a white wall, even though they arrived at your eye mixed together in a single beam of confusion. It is an analytical feat that we take for granted every single millisecond, and we can verify this complexity easily. If you look at a person standing in front of you, you see them. But someone standing to your left can look at a person standing to your right. The light from the person on the right travels across your face to the person on the left. The light from the person in front of you travels straight into your eyes. These streams of light are crossing each other right in front of your nose. They are occupying the same space at the same time. In a swimming pool, if two waves crash, they distort each other. But light? It is a linear wave system. The waves pass right through one another without getting tangled. It is a complete network of traffic, billions of information highways crossing in a single point of space, and yet they do not crash. People like to think of light as little arrows shooting through the air. You picture a ray of light leaving a bulb and hitting a book. That is a comforting mental image, but it is a lie. It is not arrows, it is a field. Think of it like a universal jelly filling the room. When a light turns on, it shakes the jelly. We call this the electromagnetic field. The arrows you imagine are just the direction the energy is traveling, but the reality is just a shaking, oscillating quantity at a specific point in space. It goes up and down, up and down. And this shaking is so elaborate, so layered with information from every object it touched, that the result is an influence that allows you to perceive a distinct reality while completely ignoring the light that is crossing your path to reach someone else. But here is where our arrogance as humans gets in the way. We think we see the world. We don't. We see a tiny, pathetic sliver of it. Going back to our swimming pool analogy, imagine that the water has all kinds of waves. Some are big, crashing waves from a cannonball dive. Some are tiny, high-frequency ripples from a raindrop. Now imagine our genius insect in the corner is picky. It decides it is only going to pay attention to waves that are exactly 2 inches apart. If a wave is 3 inches long, invisible. If it's 1 inch, doesn't exist. Your eye is that picky insect. The electromagnetic field is shaking with waves of all different sizes, but your retina is tuned, biologically, to accept only a very specific range of vibrations. We call this visible light. The waves we can see are roughly between 40 and 70 millionths of an inch long. That is it. That is your entire window on the universe. If the waves are a little bit shorter, we call them ultraviolet, and you are blind to them. If they are a little bit longer, we call them infrared, and you are blind to them too. But just because you can't see them doesn't mean they aren't there. They are crashing into you right now. Let's talk about those slower swashes, the waves that are just a little too long for your eye to focus. We have another name for this: heat. When you stand next to a campfire, you feel warmth on your skin. That sensation is your body detecting electromagnetic waves that are physically identical to light, just with a slightly longer distance between the crests. You feel the light rather than see it. But other creatures aren't so limited. Take the pit viper. This snake hunts in the desert at night. It has a specialized organ, a pit, that is sensitive to these longer waves. To a pit viper, a mouse running across the sand isn't just a warm object. It is a glowing beacon of infrared light. The mouse is radiating waves by virtue of its body heat. The snake sees the heat. We are blind to it, stumbling around in the dark, while the viper is watching a light show. But let's go even longer. Stretch those waves out further. Make them huge. These waves are still rushing through the room. They are passing through your body, through the walls, through the earth itself. We call them radio waves. And here is the thing that should keep you up at night. This room is currently full of music. It is full of voices. It is full of data. Right now, occupying the same space as the light you are using to read this, there is a broadcast from a radio station in Moscow. There is a signal from a GPS satellite. There is a song being broadcast from Peru. There is radar from an airplane looking for the ground. It is all there. It is all shaking the electromagnetic field in the room. The voice of a singer in London is physically present in the space between your eyes and this screen, vibrating the electrons in the air. You just don't have the machinery to notice it. Your eyes are tuned to the light channel, not the radio channel. But the physics is identical. It is exactly the same stuff. It is just a matter of timing. The wiggling of the field is slower for radio than it is for blue light. That is the only difference. If you don't believe that reality is this crowded, you can prove it with a piece of wire and a cheap box of electronics. We call it a radio receiver. The wire is just a metal stick. The electrons inside that wire are being pushed back and forth by the electric field in the room. They are swashing around like water in a bathtub, but they are swashing at all different speeds at once. The Moscow speed, the top 40 speed, the air traffic control speed. When you turn the knob on the radio, you aren't finding the signal. You are building a filter. You are telling the box, ignore everything except the electrons that are wiggling exactly 1 million times per second. And suddenly, out of the static, you hear a voice. The voice didn't just arrive, it was screaming in your ear the whole time. You just needed the right tool to translate the wiggle into sound. That is why the rainbow happened. Not because of a tank in mud, but because blue light is slightly better at bullying the electrons in the glass than red light is. This is the beauty of looking deeper. When you stop accepting the high school simplified version, you find connections you never knew existed. Who would have thought that the colors of a rainbow are directly determined by the mechanics of a driven spring? But this model creates a new problem. If light is just shaking electrons, and those electrons are re-radiating light, doesn't that take energy? Why is the glass transparent at all? Why doesn't the light just get absorbed and die? And what happens if you push the electron exactly at its resonant frequency? Does the glass explode? We've destroyed the tank, but now we have to rebuild the universe. And to do that, we need to talk about what happens when the math goes to infinity. If you thought this was weird, just wait until we talk about the imaginary numbers. We left off with a terrifying thought. If the blue light is closer to the electron's natural resonant frequency, it makes the electron wiggle harder. But what happens if you hit the resonant frequency exactly? If you tune your light to be perfectly in sync with that spring? According to the simplified equation we just built, the denominator becomes 0. And any math student knows that dividing by 0 is the universe's way of saying system crash. The equation predicts the amplitude of the wiggle would go to infinity. The electron would vibrate with infinite energy, presumably ripping a hole in space-time or at least shattering your window. Obviously, that doesn't happen. You don't see windows exploding just because a specific shade of UV light hit them. So, what did we miss? We missed reality. Our model of the electron on a spring was too perfect. It was frictionless. In the real world, you never get a free ride. When an electron wiggles, it is radiating energy 3. That secondary wave it creates, that costs energy. The electron is paying a tax to the universe every time it moves. In physics, we call this damping or a drag force. It's exactly like trying to run through water. The faster you try to go, the harder the water pushes back. When we add this drag term to our equation, it saves us from the infinity disaster. It puts a cap on how much the electron can wiggle, even at perfect resonance. But this drag does something else. It explains opacity. It explains why light doesn't go through a brick wall. If the drag is high, the energy from the light wave is chewed up by the electrons and turned into heat, rather than being passed along as a transparent wave. So, the very thing that stops the universe from crashing is also the reason you can't see through your own eyelids. The faster-than-light scandal. Now that we've fixed the model, we have to address the elephant in the room, or rather, the cheetah in the room. A lot of you have asked a very dangerous question. Can the index of refraction be less than 1? But wait, I hear you scream, clutching your copy of Special Relativity. Einstein said nothing can travel faster than light. You are breaking the law. Relax. Einstein is fine. The police are not coming. This is where you have to understand the difference between a phase and a signal. Remember how we said the slowing down was actually just a phase shift? A shifting of the wave crests backward? Well, under certain weird conditions, usually near that resonant frequency we talked about, the phase shift can actually go the other way. The interaction can kick the crests forward. This means the peaks of the wave appear to be traveling faster than c. This is called the phase velocity. But here is the trick. A continuous sine wave conveys zero information. It's just a monotonous hum. Beep, 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 forever. So Newton proved that the invisible rubber band holding the moon is the same one that smacks apples onto your head. Genius. But this created a problem. A big, wet, sloshing problem called the ocean. Everyone knows the moon causes the tides. It pulls the water. Simple, right? Wrong. If the moon simply pulled the water toward it, you would expect one high tide a day, when the moon is directly overhead, pulling the water up into a big bump. But that is not what happened. If you go to the beach, you know there are two high tides a day. There is a bump of water on the side facing the moon, but there is also a mysterious, rebellious bump of water on the exact opposite side of the earth, facing away from the moon. For a long time, this drove people crazy. One school of thought said, the moon pulls the water. Another school of thought said, no, the moon pulls the earth away from the water. They were fighting over who was right. Newton came along and said, you are both right, and you are both missing the point. The secret isn't just pull, it is difference. Gravity gets weaker with distance. We just learned that with the inverse square law. Here is what is actually happening. Imagine the earth is three separate pieces: the water on the side facing the moon, the solid earth in the middle, and the water on the far side. The moon's gravity pulls the hardest on the water that is close to it, so that water gets ripped away from the earth a little bit. That's your first high tide. The solid earth is further away, so the moon pulls it with medium strength. But the water on the far side? It is the furthest away, so the moon's pull is the weakest there. The result? The moon pulls the earth away from the backwater. It stretches the whole planet into a football shape. The water bulges out on both sides, not because the moon is lifting it, but because the gravitational field is tearing the planet slightly apart. But wait, it gets weirder. We have this arrogant idea that the earth is a giant, immovable rock, and the moon is a little pebble running circles around us. We think we are the center of the dance. We aren't. The moon is heavy. It is big enough to throw its weight around. The force of the moon on the earth is balanced, sure, but how? By the earth doing its own little circle. The earth is actually spinning around a point that isn't its center. Imagine a heavy father holding hands with his small child and spinning in a circle. The child flies through the air, but the father doesn't just stand like a statue. He leans back. He wobbles. He makes a small circle with his feet to counter the weight of the child. That is the earth. We are wobbling in a circle to balance the moon. We are throwing our weight around. This creates a centrifugal force that helps throw that water off the far side, adding to the tide. So the reason you can surf twice a day is because the earth is doing a clumsy waltz with a giant rock in space. This gravitational pulling and spinning explains everything about the shape of our world. Why is the earth round? Because gravity pulls everything in toward the center. Why isn't it perfectly round? Because it is spinning, and the centrifugal force throws the middle out a little bit, like pizza dough when you toss it. It balances out. Everything, the sun, the moon, the planets, they are all fighting this battle between the crush of gravity and the fling of the spin. Now, once Newton handed us these laws, scientists went on a power trip. They started measuring everything to see if Newton was as smart as he thought he was. They wanted to break the laws. The best place to test this was Jupiter. Jupiter is like a mini solar system. It has moons whizzing around it like clockwork. Literally, like clockwork. You could predict exactly when a moon would disappear behind the planet and when it would pop out the other side. It was the perfect cosmic watch. So, astronomers started timing it. They watched Jupiter's moons for years. They expected perfection. If Newton was right, the schedule should be flawless. But it wasn't. They found something disturbing. Sometimes the moons were ahead of schedule. Sometimes they were behind. And not just by a second. We are talking about 8 minutes. 8 minutes is an eternity in physics. The error wasn't random. That is the key. If it were random, it would mean the equipment was bad. But there was a pattern. When Jupiter was close to Earth in its orbit, the moons were ahead of schedule. When Jupiter was on the far side of the solar system, away from Earth, the moons were late. The clock seemed to slow down when it was far away. This didn't make sense. Does gravity get lazy when you aren't looking? Does the universe have lag? A clever fellow named Romer looked at this mess and realized something that shattered our perception of reality. The moons weren't late. The news was. We assume that when we look at something, we see it now, instantaneously. Romer realized that was a lie. He concluded that it takes time for light to travel from Jupiter to Earth. When Jupiter is far away, the light has to travel an extra distance across the solar system to reach our eyes. That extra trip takes time, about 16 minutes to cross the Earth's orbit diameter. So when we see the moon pop out from behind Jupiter, we aren't seeing it happen now. We are seeing it happen in the past. We are watching a delayed broadcast. Romer used those errors in the schedule to calculate the speed of light. Think about that. They used the law of gravity to find the speed of light. If they didn't trust Newton's law of gravity, they would have just thought their clocks were broken or the moons were weird. But because they trusted the law, they knew the error had to be a new discovery. This is how science works. It is not a list of facts, it is an avalanche. One discovery creates a tool. That tool cracks open a new door. That door reveals a new mystery. Newton gave us the math to understand the orbits. The orbits gave us the anomaly in Jupiter. The anomaly gave us the speed of light. The speed of light eventually gave us Einstein and the theory of relativity. It is a continuous, crashing process that has been running for 400 years. We are still in that avalanche. We are still falling forward, faster and faster. The universe is full of these invisible waves, these bending forces, these delayed signals from the past. It is chaotic, it is messy, and it is beautiful. You don't need a PhD to appreciate it. You just need to stop assuming the world is simple. It isn't. It is an intricate puzzle waiting for you to notice the pieces that don't fit. So next time you look at the moon, or the tide, or a light bulb, remember, you are watching a cosmic machine at work. If you want to keep peeling back the layers of this reality, you know what to do. Smash that like button, subscribe for more brain-breaking science, and let me know in the comments, what fact about the universe do you suspect is completely wrong? Let's argue about it. Successful people think differently because they're not worried about other people's judgment. While the world criticizes, they create. While most people are busy protecting their reputation, they're too busy searching for the truth. And here's the key. Thinking differently is not an aesthetic choice. It's an intellectual survival skill. If you think like everyone else, you'll end up with the same results as everyone else. And the average is harsh. Uninspiring jobs, lives with no purpose, routines where people wake up, work, complain, and go to sleep. Nothing more. Is that really living? Or is it just surviving? Pay close attention now, because this may change the course of your life. Think differently or die average. Stop believing what everyone else believes. Stop repeating what everyone else says. Every success story begins with someone who dared to disagree with normality. Not because they wanted to look rebellious, but because curiosity was stronger than the fear of judgment. And it's this curiosity, directed and disciplined, that opens doors the average will never see. So think differently. And if you decide to think differently, prepare yourself for something greater. The freedom to learn anything, to create paths no one has created, to master your own mind. Listen carefully now, because what I'm about to reveal lies behind every genius mind: curiosity. Ordinary people lose curiosity over time. They accept ready-made answers, stop asking questions, stop investigating. They think they already know enough. And that's the moment mediocrity sets in. Now look at the people who truly stood out. Scientists, entrepreneurs, creative leaders. They all had one thing in common. They never stopped asking questions. Even if they didn't understand something, they would ask again and again and again until the answer finally made sense in their mind. This is the first step to thinking differently. Many people are embarrassed to raise their hand and say, "I don't understand," afraid of being criticized. In a classroom, the student who asks too many questions is easily labeled as stupid. But the truth is exactly the opposite. The one who asks questions is one step ahead. The one who questions shows the courage to learn. That's why, if you want to start thinking differently, begin with the simple act of admitting your doubt. The courage to ask is the mark of someone who refuses to remain ordinary. Now pay attention to me, because I'll show you how to truly think differently. Thinking differently is a daily exercise in intellectual freedom. The first step is to do what you love. When you work or study something that sparks passion, your energy multiplies. Normal is waking up tired because you spend energy on activities that don't inspire you. Different is waking up hungry for life because you're investing your time in what makes sense. Ask yourself, if nobody judged me, what would I choose to learn, to create, or to build? That answer points to your true path. Second, protect your mental independence. That means not letting other people's opinions become the filter for what you think or do. Most people fear being criticized, fear being called strange. But remember, everyone who changed the world was ridiculed before they were applauded. Thinking differently always bothers people because it exposes the mediocrity of those who follow the herd. Third, feed your curiosity without fear. Ask, test, explore. That's the fuel of innovation. Don't accept anything just because everyone does it this way. Ask yourself, is there another way? The simple act of questioning already puts you on another level. Fourth, simplify your life to free up energy for the essential. Those who think like everyone else get lost in excess. Those who think differently focus on what matters. If you're exhausted, it's hard to have the clarity to think in a new way. Energy is born from being aligned with purpose, eliminating the unnecessary, and putting strength into what truly moves your life. Pay close attention now, because what I'm about to tell you is one of the mind's biggest prisons, the fear of being different. Most people don't live their own ideas. They live other people's ideas. They're shaped by the opinions of family, friends, society, the media. They spend life trying to please, to fit in, to be accepted. But those who think differently understand something simple. If you always seek approval, you'll never have clarity. To think differently, you must learn to shield your mind against the pressure of the majority. And that starts with a daily exercise. Every time you feel tempted to do something just because everyone does it, stop and ask, does this really make sense to me? Does it bring me closer to what I want? Or does it just make me like everyone else? That simple question is enough to expose the automatic choices that keep you stuck in the average. Remember, life is too short to live dependent on other people's approval. Another point, choose carefully the voices you listen to. I'm not saying ignore everything and everyone, but be discerning. Ask yourself, does this person have results I admire? Do they live what they preach? Or do they just repeat what they've heard? If not, why give their opinion so much weight? Learn to separate constructive criticism from noise. And here's a powerful detail. The courage to stand by your own vision earns respect, even from those who disagree. At first, you may be criticized. You may even be ridiculed. But over time, when results appear, the same people who laughed at you go quiet. Nothing is more convincing than the evidence of a life lived with purpose and authenticity. Thinking differently is swimming against the current. It's bearing the pressure of judgment without giving in. It's choosing the clarity of your conscience over the empty applause of the crowd. And when you train yourself in this, you realize that freedom isn't being accepted. It's living true to what you believe, even if no one claps. Thinking differently isn't an inborn talent. It's a trained habit. You're not born outside the box. You build the box and then learn to break it every day. That takes discipline, and discipline is born from rituals. If you want to stand out, you need to turn curiosity and mental independence into concrete actions that shape how you think. The first ritual is the daily question. Pick any situation in your life and ask, why is this done this way? Don't accept the first answer. Go deeper. Who said it has to be like this? Is there a better, simpler, faster way to do it? When repeated every day, this exercise trains your mind not to settle for ready-made answers. The second ritual is explaining out loud. When you learn something new, don't keep it to yourself. Explain it. Even if it's to the mirror. When you speak, your mind organizes, your ideas align, and the gaps show up. That's the moment you discover if you truly understood. This simple habit will accelerate your ability to learn 10 times more than someone who only reads and repeats. The third ritual is creative review. At the end of the day, take one idea or important concept you learned and recreate it in your own words. Use a metaphor, a story, an example from your life. This act of recreation makes the idea stop being external and become part of you. It's in this act that different thinking begins to flourish. And finally, the ritual of conscious observation. Set aside a few minutes to observe something ordinary and ask yourself, what is no one else seeing here? It could be an object, a situation, even a conversation. This practice trains your eyes to see beyond the obvious. That's how innovations are born, from someone who looked at the ordinary and saw the extraordinary. Those who practice these rituals don't just think differently, they begin to live on another level of perception. And that difference builds up day after day until it becomes an advantage impossible to ignore. But here's the truth. The path of those who think differently is never easy. They are misunderstood, judged, often humiliated. The crowd cannot stand those who break the pattern, because independent thinking exposes the mediocrity of those who prefer to follow the herd. It's easier to call someone crazy than to admit they might have seen something you didn't. But listen, every great person you admire went through this. Galileo was condemned for seeing beyond what the church accepted. Bruce Lee was ridiculed for mixing styles and creating his own philosophy. All of them were seen as too different until the world had to bow to the evidence of what they built. And here's the secret few have the courage to accept. Thinking differently is expensive in the beginning, but it pays dividends forever. The rejection you feel today is the same energy that will fuel your victory tomorrow. This is the path of those who refuse to die average. They choose truth over acceptance, curiosity over indifference, courage over fear. And with that, they build something that lasts, something that inspires, something that cannot be erased. So I tell you, if you want to think differently, be prepared to be misunderstood. Be ready to be criticized. But also be certain that in the end you will be remembered. Because no one remembers the crowd that merely repeated. History remembers the names of those who dared to be unique. Think differently. Protect your flame and never bow to mediocrity. Because in the end you either have the courage to live as an exception or you accept dying as just another in the average. Now it's on you. I want you to prove to yourself that you've chosen to think differently. Write in the comments, I will never accept dying being influenced. This phrase is more than words. It's a pact with your mind, a declaration that you will not bow to mediocrity. And if you enjoyed this lesson, leave your like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because here you'll keep receiving ideas that will challenge your mind, expand your vision, and accelerate your learning. Remember, those who think like the majority live like the majority, but those who choose to think differently create a destiny the crowd could never imagine. Every time you seek approval, your worth becomes a hostage to someone else's opinion. And the strange thing is, the more you try to please the world, the more the world ignores you. Life begins to lose its brightness when you live to be seen instead of living to understand. Now imagine just for a moment that all the energy you spend trying to be accepted was redirected into learning, into exploring, into understanding how things truly work. Imagine the power that would have. You'd start to see the hidden beauty in simple things, in sound, in light, in ideas, in people. Because true genius isn't born from the desire to be admired, but from curiosity, that pure restlessness that makes you want to discover why things are the way they are. And when you dive into that curiosity, life starts to flow in a way that no ambition can ever reproduce. The truth is, the pursuit of recognition is a trap disguised as motivation. It pushes you to run faster, to work harder, to achieve more.
yet it never lets you rest. It's a bottomless pit, and you know what's at the bottom of that pit? Nothing but emptiness. The emptiness of someone who lived to be remembered instead of living to understand. So listen closely. Living for the love of understanding is the only path that truly sets you free, because the pleasure of discovering is the reward itself, and the one who learns for the joy of learning never needs applause. Pay attention to me now, because what I'm about to tell you might completely change the way you see life. You've spent far too long trying to be recognized, trying to prove something to others, and without realizing it, you became a prisoner of that need. But let me tell you this, most of the people who seem to be winning are actually losing silently. They collect titles, possessions, praise, yet they lose something invisible, their inner freedom. They live like actors on a stage, playing a role the world wrote for them. But you know the problem? When the curtain falls, there's only silence.
And in that silence, the question no one wants to face appears. Why am I doing all this?
If your reason is to be recognized, you'll never rest. Because recognition is volatile. It shifts with people's moods, with trends, with the tides. One day they applaud you, the next they forget you. And if your worth depends on that, you're doomed to rise and fall with the world around you. But when you do something for the simple joy of understanding, something inside you changes. Suddenly time moves differently. You stop chasing, and you start being guided by something deeper. Curiosity. Curiosity is the engine of life. It turns boredom into discovery, pain into learning, chaos into meaning. When you follow that energy, you no longer need recognition, because the pursuit itself becomes fulfilling. It's the joy of understanding what lies behind things, of seeing how everything connects. That is true power. When you learn for the love of comprehension, the entire world opens before you. You stop being an actor, and you become the author. And for the first time, life starts to make sense. But to reach that point, you must do something few ever dare. Stop trying to be someone, and start trying to understand something. The difference seems small, but it's enormous. The first path enslaves you. The second one sets you free. Pay attention to me now, because I want to take you to a place where very few have the courage to look. People think freedom means being able to do whatever they want, but that's just the reflection of modern ignorance. True freedom is being able to think whatever you want, to doubt what you've been taught, and to allow yourself not to know. A mind that seeks recognition is enslaved by certainty. A mind that seeks understanding is free to explore. Do you want to know what truly destroys genius? The need to appear intelligent. The person who tries to look smart for others will never be truly intelligent, because they're focused on displaying, not discovering. Genius is born the moment you abandon the desire to be special and embrace the joy of uncovering the obvious. Think about it. Everything you know was once obvious to someone who had the courage to look closely. The difference between the mediocre and the brilliant doesn't lie in talent. It lies in genuine curiosity. The mediocre wants to be right. The brilliant wants to learn, even if it means stripping away their own vanity. And here's the irony. The more you care about what others think, the less you actually think for yourself. A curious mind is like a child taking apart a toy just to see what's inside. It doesn't crave status. It doesn't want applause. It wants the mystery. It wants the why. And that's what keeps the inner fire alive. The sincere desire to understand the world before the world understands you. Life becomes light when you realize you don't need to impress anyone. You begin to do things for the simple pleasure of seeing what happens. And strangely enough, that's when everything starts to work. When you stop chasing results, the results begin to chase you. Because the universe responds to genuine curiosity, not to empty ambition. The secret isn't to be recognized, it's to be so deeply immersed in the process that recognition becomes irrelevant. The reward lies in the very act of understanding. And those who live that way exist in a state of freedom that money and status could never buy. Now imagine something uncomfortable yet necessary. What if most of human suffering didn't come from lack, but from excess? The excess of wanting, proving, showing. The world taught you that ambition is a virtue, but forgot to warn you that blind ambition is poison. You run, you exhaust yourself, you achieve, and when you finally arrive where you always wanted to be, you realize there's no one there, not even you. People confuse purpose with performance.
They crave meaning, yet spend their days trying to win a race they never chose to run. They long for freedom, yet choose paths that chain them. The pursuit of status, applause, validation. And the worst part? They believe they're evolving, when in truth, they're only moving further away from themselves. Let me tell you something few have the courage to face. Success without understanding is just another form of failure. Because if you don't understand what you're doing, success becomes an accident. And accidents don't set you free, they enslave you. When you act only for the result becomes your master. But when you act for the love of understanding, you are in control, and life begins to flow again. There is no purer pleasure than the pleasure of truly understanding. When you truly understand, there's no need to compete. There's no envy, no rush, no comparison. There's only a curious silence. That rare moment when everything makes sense for just a few seconds, and you feel part of something far greater than ambition itself. The problem is most people want to understand the world, but they don't want to understand themselves. They crave answers, but can't stand questions. And that's why they live tired, anxious, and empty. Because they try to fill what is spiritual with what is material. They try to buy, conquer, or prove what can only be understood. Life is not a podium. It's a laboratory. You're not here to win. You're here to discover. And when you understand that, you realize the whole game changes. It stops being a competition and becomes an investigation. Every mistake becomes a clue. Every failure, a new hypothesis. And that's how you begin to free yourself. Not by winning, but by understanding. When a human being finally lets go of the need for recognition, something extraordinary happens. They are reborn. The mind becomes light. The heart becomes quiet. And for the first time, they begin to taste real freedom. Suddenly, fear disappears. The fear of failing, of being judged, of not being enough. Because now, none of that matters. You no longer live to prove. You live to experience. And in that moment, life starts to align with who you truly are. Opportunities appear. Ideas flow. The right people come closer. Because you stopped being a copy begging for acceptance and become an authentic source of energy and creation. Authenticity has a power the modern world has forgotten. When you are real, the entire universe seems to recognize you in a way applause never could. Life begins to conspire in your favor, because at last you're playing the right game, the game of growing from within. And everything that once seemed difficult begins to happen naturally, because when your focus shifts from appearing to understanding, you connect to the natural flow of things. You don't force, you simply are. Do you want to know what true peace feels like? It's waking up one day and realizing you don't need to impress anyone, that you are enough, simply for being here, learning, failing, trying to understand. And from that moment on, every gesture, every word, every small discovery starts to have meaning. You begin to see beauty where you once saw routine. You begin to see purpose where you once saw haste. Lightness is born when vanity dies. And the pleasure of discovery becomes greater than any achievement. Life flows, not because you control it, but because you understand it. And once you understand, you no longer need to run. You realize that what truly matters is not what others think of you, but what the universe reveals when you finally choose to listen. Now write this in the comments. With conviction, I choose the freedom of understanding. This phrase will begin to reprogram your subconscious, reminding your mind every day of what truly matters. From today on, make yourself a promise. Live for the love of understanding, not for ambition. Stop chasing recognition and start seeking meaning. That is the key that changes everything. If this message touched you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell, because what's coming next will expand your mind even more. And remember, to understand is to be free, and the one who becomes free inspires the world, without needing to say a single word.
You know, people often ask me how I managed to understand so many different things. Physics, mathematics, biology, even safe cracking and bongo drums. They assume there must be some kind of trick to it, some natural talent I was born with. But that's not really true. The truth is much simpler, and perhaps more useful. I learned how to learn. And once you know how to learn, everything becomes possible. Let me tell you about something that happened when I was working at Los Alamos during the war. We had all these brilliant people, some of the greatest minds in physics, and we were all working on this enormous problem. One day, I was sitting in the cafeteria with some colleagues, and they were discussing a particular aspect of neutron diffusion. The conversation was full of complex equations and technical terms, and I noticed that while everyone was nodding along, I had this uncomfortable feeling that I didn't really understand what we were talking about. Not deeply, anyway. Now, I could have just stayed quiet and pretended to understand. That's what most people do. But I had learned something important years before, something my father taught me when I was just a boy. He taught me that knowing the name of something is not the same as knowing something. And that distinction changed everything for me. My father used to take me on walks in the Catskill Mountains. He wasn't a scientist, he was in the uniform business, but he had this wonderful way of looking at the world. We'd see a bird, and he'd say, "You see that bird? In German, it's called a Fehlstorch. In Chinese, they call it a Chungling. In Japanese, a Katakataka. You can know all those names in every language in the world, but when you're done, you'll know absolutely nothing about the bird. You'll only know about people in different places and what they call a bird." Now, he'd say, "That bird is a brown-throated thrush, and it's singing because it's defending its territory or attracting a mate. When it moves like that, it's looking for insects. That's beginning to know something." This lesson stuck with me, really stuck, because I realized that most of what we call knowledge is actually just familiarity with labels. We mistake the map for the territory. We think because we can name something, we understand it. But understanding is something else entirely. So back to that cafeteria at Los Alamos. When I felt that uncomfortable sensation of not really understanding, I did what I always do. I went back to my room, took out some paper, and I started to work through the problem myself. Not by memorizing what the others had said, but by trying to explain it to myself from scratch, as if I were teaching it to someone who knew nothing about physics. I wrote, "Okay, what is neutron diffusion really about? What's actually happening?" And then I tried to explain it in the simplest possible terms. Not using the fancy equations first, those would come later, but using plain language. I imagined I was explaining it to someone like my father, someone intelligent but without technical training. And here's what happened. I got stuck. I couldn't explain it simply because I didn't understand it well enough. There were gaps in my knowledge that I had been papering over with technical jargon. So I went back to the basic principles. I looked at what I did understand solidly, and I built up from there, piece by piece, always checking. Can I explain this simply? Does this make sense? When I finally could explain it in simple terms, something magical happened. I understood it better than I had before, much better. And more than that, I could see connections to other things I knew. I could see where the equations came from, what they really meant, why they had to be that way and not some other way. This became my method. Whenever I needed to learn something, anything, I would follow this same process. I'd take a blank piece of paper and I'd write at the top, "What is?" And then whatever concept I was trying to understand. Then I'd try to explain it as if I were teaching it to someone bright but completely unfamiliar with the subject. The key is that you can't fool yourself when you do this. You can fool yourself in a lot of ways. You can memorize equations. You can learn to manipulate symbols. You can even get the right answers on tests. But when you try to explain something in plain language, the truth comes out. If you can't explain it simply, you don't really understand it. And let me be clear about what I mean by simply. I don't mean dumbing it down or being imprecise. I mean stripping away the unnecessary complexity, the jargon that we use to hide our lack of understanding. Einstein once said something about this, that you should be able to explain your theory to a barmaid. People laughed at that, but he was right. If you truly understand something, you can explain it in everyday language. The complexity should be in the idea itself, not in the words you use to describe it. I remember when I was trying to understand quantum electrodynamics after the war. This was a field in crisis. The theory made ridiculous predictions, infinities everywhere. People were stuck. I was stuck too, at first. I knew the mathematical machinery, sure, but I didn't really understand what was happening physically. So I started over. I got a notebook and I began to explain it to myself from the beginning. An electron moves from point A to point B. What really happens? I drew pictures, simple pictures, little arrows and lines. I didn't start with the Lagrangian formalism or the canonical approach. I started with, what is the simplest way to think about this? And you know what I discovered? All that fancy machinery that everyone was using, it was obscuring something much simpler underneath. By forcing myself to explain it simply, by using these little pictures I drew, I found a different way to do the calculations, a way that made sense to me physically. Those simple pictures eventually became what people call Feynman diagrams, and they helped solve some of the problems that had everyone confused. But here's what I want you to understand. The diagrams weren't the point. The point was the process of simplification, of explanation, of getting down to what's really happening. The diagrams were just a tool that came out of trying to understand clearly. Now, you might think this approach would be slow. And in one sense it is. It takes longer to really understand something this way than to just memorize formulas or to accept what authorities tell you. But in another sense, it's much faster. Because when you truly understand something, when you can explain it simply and clearly, you never forget it. It becomes part of how you think, and you can use it to understand new things. Because you're not just carrying around a bag of disconnected facts and formulas. You're carrying around principles that you understand deeply. I saw this when I taught at Caltech. Students would come to my office hours, frustrated because they couldn't solve a problem. They'd show me pages of equations they'd written. Look, they'd say, I know the formula, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I can't get the answer. And I'd ask them, what's the problem about? Physically, what's happening? Often, they couldn't tell me. They could write down the equation for conservation of energy, but they couldn't explain what energy conservation actually means. They could manipulate the symbols, but they didn't understand what the symbols represented. So I'd say, forget the equations for a moment. Tell me in words what's happening in this problem, and we'd talk through it. A ball is rolling down a hill. What does that mean? It means it's losing potential energy. Where does that energy go? Into kinetic energy, into movement. How much? Well, it depends on the height of the hill and the mass of the ball. Once they understood it that way, the equations weren't mysterious anymore. The equations were just a precise way of writing down what they already understood. They became tools instead of obstacles. This is what I mean by learning. Not memorization, not symbol manipulation. Understanding. There's another part to this, though, something equally important. When you explain something to yourself this way, you discover what you don't know. You find the boundaries of your understanding, and that's incredibly valuable. Most people avoid these boundaries. They stay in the safe zone of what they already know, or they pretend the boundaries aren't there. But the boundaries are where all the interesting stuff is. That's where learning happens. That's where the adventure begins. I remember reading about biology later in my life. I was curious about it, but I didn't have the years of background that a professional biologist would have. So I'd read a paper, and I'd come across something like the Krebs cycle. And I'd think, do I really know what that is? So I'd stop and I'd get a piece of paper and I'd try to explain the Krebs cycle to myself. What is it? Why does it happen? What's the purpose? And I'd get stuck on some step. I didn't understand why this molecule becomes that molecule. So I'd look it up. I'd read more carefully. I'd draw it out. And gradually, piece by piece, I'd build up my understanding. The beautiful thing about this method is that it works for anything. Physics, mathematics, biology, history, philosophy, it doesn't matter. The principle is the same. Take an idea and explain it to yourself simply. Find the gaps, fill them in, build from solid ground. And here's something else I discovered. When you learn this way, you often find that the experts don't understand things as well as you thought. You find inconsistencies in their explanations. You find gaps in the standard way of teaching things. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes you find a better way to think about something, a clearer way, because you refuse to accept confusion. I'm not saying this to criticize experts. I'm saying it because it's liberating. You don't have to wait for someone else to explain things perfectly. You don't have to feel inadequate because a textbook confuses you. Sometimes the textbook is just poorly written. Sometimes even the experts are confused. Your job is to understand for yourself in your own way. Of course, you have to be honest with yourself, brutally honest. You can't fake understanding. When you try to explain something and you realize you're just using circular definitions or you're hand-waving over the hard parts, you have to stop and admit, I don't actually get this yet. That's okay. That's good, actually, because now you know what you need to work on. You've turned a vague feeling of confusion into a specific question, and specific questions can be answered. I think one reason many people struggle to learn new things as they get older is not because their minds are less capable, that's mostly nonsense, but because they become less willing to admit confusion. They have identities as knowledgeable people, as experts in their fields, and it's uncomfortable to feel like a beginner again, so they stay on familiar ground. But learning requires that beginner's mind. It requires being willing to say, I don't understand this yet, but I'm going to figure it out. No shame in that, no embarrassment, just curiosity and determination. When I was at Los Alamos, Hans Bethe was there, brilliant physicist, one of the best. And I noticed something about him. Whenever someone explained a new idea to him, he wouldn't just nod and accept it. He'd work through it himself, right there, often asking questions that seemed almost naive. Wait, why does that follow? I don't see how you got from this step to that step. But those naive questions often revealed that the person explaining hadn't really thought it through properly. Bethe taught me that real understanding means being able to answer the simple question, the fundamental why question. If you can't answer those, you're building on sand. So here's what I learned, and what I've tried to practice throughout my life. Learning is not about accumulating information. It's not about being able to recite facts or manipulate symbols. Learning is about building a structure of understanding, brick by brick, where each brick is solid and you know why it's where it is. You start with what you understand clearly. You expand from there, always checking. Can I explain this simply? Does this make sense? When you hit something you can't explain simply, that's not a failure, that's a discovery. You found the edge of your understanding. Now you can work on extending it. And you know what happens when you learn this way? You become independent. You don't need to rely on authorities or textbooks or experts to tell you what's true. You can figure things out yourself. You develop judgment. You can tell when someone is explaining something clearly and when they're hiding behind jargon. You can tell when you really understand something and when you're fooling yourself. This independence of mind, that's the real value. Not just the specific things you learn, but the ability to learn anything. The confidence that comes from knowing you can take any subject, no matter how complex or unfamiliar, and gradually make sense of it. There's a freedom in this. You're not trapped by your past education or lack of it. You're not limited by what subjects you studied in school. If you want to understand something, really understand it, you can. It might take time. It might take effort, but it's possible. I've watched people talk themselves out of learning things because they think they're not good at math, or not a science person, or whatever story they've told themselves. But those are just stories. If you're willing to start simple, admit confusion, and work through things step by step, you can understand anything. I think about my father's lesson with the bird. All those fancy names in all those languages, they're easy to collect. You can fill your head with them. You can impress people at parties, but they're empty. Real knowledge is different. Real knowledge is understanding what the bird is doing and why. Real knowledge lets you make predictions, see connections, understand how things work. And the beautiful thing is, anyone can do this. You don't need to be specially gifted. You don't need advanced degrees. You just need curiosity, honesty, and patience. You need to be willing to start simple, to admit confusion, to work through things step by step. I've spent my whole life trying to understand things, and I'm still doing it. There's always more to learn, more to figure out. And every time I sit down with a piece of paper and try to explain something to myself, I'm using the same method I developed as a young man. It never gets old because understanding never gets old. The pleasure of figuring something out, of seeing clearly what was once murky, that never diminishes. So if there's a secret to learning anything fast, it's this. Don't try to go fast, try to go deep. Try to really understand. Explain it simply. Find the gaps, fill them in. Build on solid ground. The speed comes naturally when your foundation is strong. What looks like slow, careful work at the beginning becomes rapid progress later, because you're not constantly backtracking to fix misunderstandings or rememorizing things you never really grasped. And remember, the goal isn't to know more than other people, or to be clever, or to impress anyone. The goal is to see clearly, to understand truly. Everything else, the success, the recognition, the ability to solve difficult problems, that all comes as a byproduct of genuine understanding. Chase understanding, and the rest takes care of itself. That's what I learned anyway. And it served me pretty well.
Let me be honest with you. You think you understand things, but most of what you carry in your head is just labels, words. They sound impressive. They shut down questions. They give authority without earning it. But if you strip the language away and nothing meaningful remains, then the understanding was never there. It was decoration, a costume worn by ignorance to look intelligent. Here's the uncomfortable part. Most education systems reward this behavior. You're taught to recognize the right answers, not to wrestle with the problems. You're trained to pass tests, not to challenge assumptions. So you grow up believing that knowing the correct terminology means you know the subject. It doesn't. It just means you've been exposed to it. Real understanding begins where memorization fails. It begins the moment you ask a question that doesn't have a clean answer. It begins when you try to explain an idea in simple terms and realize you can't. That moment of failure is not a sign that you're stupid. It's proof that you're finally touching the edge of what you don't know, and that edge is where thinking actually starts. The mind loves certainty because certainty feels safe, but certainty is often a shortcut, a way to stop investigating. The moment you become emotionally attached to an explanation, you stop testing it. You defend it instead. You look for agreement rather than evidence. And slowly, without noticing, curiosity is replaced by belief. Belief is easy. Understanding is hard. Understanding demands humility. It requires you to accept that your current explanation might be incomplete or wrong or useful only in limited situations. It forces you to separate what you wish were true from what actually survives contact with reality. That process is uncomfortable, which is why so few people commit to it. Instead, they lean on authority. Someone famous said it. A book stated it. A teacher explained it. That may be a starting point, but it is never the finish line. Reality does not recognize credentials. It only responds to accurate descriptions. If two explanations compete, the one that predicts outcomes more reliably wins. Not because it sounds better, not because it's older, not because more people repeat it, but because it works. That's the only standard that matters. And this is where most people quietly fail. They never test their understanding. They never ask what would happen if this were wrong. They never try to break their own ideas. They protect them, they decorate them, they repeat them louder. But ideas don't become stronger through protection. They become stronger through pressure. If you can't explain an idea without hiding behind jargon, you don't own it. If you can't answer basic questions without getting defensive, you don't understand it. And if you can't admit uncertainty, you've already stopped learning. The goal is not to sound intelligent. That's a shallow ambition. The goal is to see more clearly. And clarity often looks simple, even obvious, once you finally reach it. Not because it was easy, but because confusion has been removed. So here is the challenge you should carry with you. Whenever you learn a new concept, strip the words away and ask what remains. Ask what it explains, what it predicts, what it fails to explain. Ask where it breaks. Ask how you would know if it were wrong. Do this consistently, and your confidence will shrink, but your understanding will grow. You'll speak less, you'll listen more. You'll be slower to declare certainty and faster to ask better questions. That's not weakness. That's intellectual strength. Because the person who knows the limits of their understanding is far more dangerous, in the best possible way, than the person who merely knows the right words. And until you learn that difference, you don't understand reality. You just recognize its names. Certainty is often the enemy of truth because the moment you become absolutely sure, you stop looking. You close the door, not because you've reached the end of understanding, but because certainty feels comfortable. It gives the mind a place to rest. And when the mind rests, inquiry dies. Truth is not offended by questions. False ideas are. That alone should make you suspicious of anything that demands loyalty instead of examination. Real understanding invites pressure. It survives doubt. It improves when challenged, but certainty behaves differently. It protects itself. It resists testing. It treats questions as threats rather than tools. Most people don't realize when certainty takes over because it disguises itself as confidence. Confidence sounds strong. It feels decisive. It's rewarded socially. But confidence without continuous testing is just frozen thinking. It's an opinion that stopped evolving. The world does not work that way. Reality keeps changing, or at least revealing new layers of itself. Explanations that once worked may fail under new conditions. Ideas that were useful approximations can become misleading if treated as absolute. Truth is not a trophy you win once and keep forever. It's a process, an ongoing conversation with reality. Certainty interrupts that conversation. When you're certain, you stop asking why and start saying because. You stop listening for signals that contradict you. You reinterpret evidence to protect your belief instead of adjusting your belief to fit the evidence. That's not understanding, that's maintenance. And the most dangerous certainty is not loud arrogance. It's quiet confidence, the kind that never feels the need to question itself, the kind that says this is how it is and moves on. That mindset blocks discovery not by force but by satisfaction. History is full of ideas that were once held with absolute certainty and later collapsed under simple observation. They didn't fall because people were stupid. They fell because people were convinced they were finished thinking. Every major correction in human understanding began with someone saying, "I'm not convinced," or "something doesn't fit." Those statements don't come from certainty. They come from doubt. Doubt is not the opposite of knowledge, it's the engine of it. Doubt creates movement. It keeps ideas flexible. It allows you to hold explanations lightly, ready to replace them when better ones appear. Without doubt, learning becomes memorization and progress becomes repetition. But doubt is uncomfortable. It leaves questions open. It resists closure. That's why certainty is attractive. It offers psychological relief. It lets you stop struggling with uncertainty and declare victory. The problem is, truth doesn't care about your comfort. Nature doesn't adjust itself to match your beliefs. It doesn't reward conviction. It rewards accuracy. And accuracy requires constant adjustment. The moment you believe your explanation is final, you stop making those adjustments. This is why the smartest thinkers are often the least certain, not because they know less, but because they see more. They recognize the gaps. They understand the assumptions hidden inside their explanations. They know where their models work, and where they don't say, this is the truth. They say, this works so far. That small difference changes everything. Certainty turns ideas into identities. Once that happens, questioning the idea feels like a personal attack. Evidence becomes an enemy. Criticism becomes disrespect. And truth becomes secondary to self-protection. At that point, learning is no longer the goal. Winning arguments has nothing to do with understanding reality. If you want to get closer to truth, you have to make peace with uncertainty. You have to accept that your current understanding is provisional, useful perhaps, effective maybe, but never final. That doesn't mean you drift without conclusions. It means you hold conclusions with humility. You use them, test them, and remain willing to abandon them when they fail. Certainty shuts down that flexibility. It replaces curiosity with defense. It trades exploration for stability. And while stability feels good, it quietly erodes the very thing that led you to understanding in the first place. So the real danger of certainty is not that it's wrong. It's that it prevents you from discovering when it is. The truth does not require you to believe in it. It requires you to keep checking. Authority does not equal correctness, and confusing the two is one of the fastest ways to stop thinking. The moment a statement is accepted because of who said it rather than why it works, understanding takes a back seat. Titles replace testing. Reputation replaces reasoning. And slowly, without noticing, judgment is outsourced. Authority feels efficient. It saves time. You don't have to struggle through uncertainty or verify claims yourself if someone important has already spoken. That shortcut is tempting, especially in complex subjects where the effort required to check things feels overwhelming. But convenience is not truth, and mental laziness has never produced. Insight, reality does not recognize rank. It doesn't care about degrees, awards, or confidence. If an explanation is wrong, it will fail no matter who proposed it. If it's right, it will work even if it came from an unknown voice. Nature does not negotiate with authority. The danger begins when respect turns into obedience. Respect is reasonable. You listen carefully to people with experience. You consider their ideas seriously. Obedience is different. Obedience means suspending your own judgment. It means accepting conclusions without understanding the reasoning behind them. That's not learning, that's submission. Many people mistake disagreement with disrespect. They think questioning an expert is arrogance. It's not. Refusing to question is negligence. If an idea is solid, it will survive scrutiny. If it collapses when questioned, authority was the only thing holding it up. History is a record of authoritative certainty being corrected by careful doubt. For long periods, confident experts were wrong, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they trusted established answers more than observed reality. Progress didn't come from louder credentials. It came from people willing to check. Authority tends to protect itself. Once a system of ideas becomes institutionalized, challenges are treated as threats rather than opportunities. Dissenters are dismissed, not evaluated. But truth doesn't advance by consensus. It advances by correction. The most reliable thinkers understand this. They don't ask who said it. First, they ask, how do we know? They care less about pedigree and more about evidence. They don't reject authority automatically, but they never surrender to it either. Blind trust creates fragile knowledge. It works only as long as no one tests it. The moment reality pushes back, the cracks appear. And when that happens, people who relied on authority instead of understanding are left confused, angry, or defensive. Understanding requires ownership. You must be able to trace an idea back to its foundations, see its assumptions, and recognize its limits. If you can't do that, then the idea isn't really yours. You're carrying it for someone else. This is why authority should guide curiosity, not replace it. Experts can point you toward useful questions, proven methods, and past failures, but they cannot think for you. The moment they do, learning stops. there is also a subtle arrogance hidden in blind obedience. It's the belief that someone else has already done all the necessary thinking, so you don't have to. That assumption is not humility, it's avoidance. True humility is acknowledging that no one is infallible, including the most respected voices in the room. It's recognizing that expertise increases reliability, not certainty. Even the best explanations are approximations, waiting to be improved or replaced. Authority becomes dangerous when it is treated as a shield against criticism. When someone says, "Trust me," instead of showing their reasoning, that's a warning sign. Truth does not need protection from questions. If you want to get closer to reality, learn to separate respect from acceptance. Listen carefully. Examine thoroughly. Agree conditionally. Disagree respectfully. And always reserve the right to change your mind. Because the moment you stop questioning authority, you stop participating in the search for truth. You become a spectator in someone else's understanding. And reality will eventually remind you that it never asked who was in charge. Questions are more valuable than answers because answers have an expiration date and questions do not. An answer can feel solid, complete, and satisfying, but that feeling is often an illusion. It gives the mind closure, and closure is where curiosity quietly dies. A good question, on the other hand, refuses to let you rest. It keeps pulling at the loose threads of your understanding. It exposes gaps you didn't know were there. And that discomfort is not a flaw, it's the signal that real thinking has begun. Answers are attractive because they feel like progress. You ask something, you receive a response, and your brain registers completion. But most answers are temporary solutions to deeper problems. They work within a limited context under certain assumptions at a particular level of detail. Treat them as final and they become obstacles. They stop you from noticing when conditions change or when the explanation no longer fits reality. A question does the opposite. It keeps the system open. When you ask a serious question, you are admitting that your current understanding is incomplete. That admission is powerful. It creates space for learning. It allows new information to enter without being filtered through the need to be right. A question doesn't demand loyalty, it demands exploration. Most people are trained to value answers early in life. School rewards correct responses, not interesting questions. Exams measure how well you can reproduce what's already known, not how deeply you can interrogate it. Over time, this trains the mind to chase closure instead of clarity. The habit becomes automatic. Get the answer, move on. But moving on too quickly is how shallow understanding survives. An answer can stop a conversation. A question can open 10 new ones. That's why progress, real progress, comes from questioning what seems obvious. Every major shift in understanding started with someone refusing to accept an answer that everyone else was comfortable with. Not because they wanted to be difficult, but because something didn't sit right. Questions are dangerous to weak ideas. That's precisely why they matter. If an explanation collapses under a simple question, it was never strong to begin with. Strong ideas don't fear questions, they depend on them. Each challenge refines them, sharpens their boundaries, reveals their limits. Without questions, ideas stagnate. They become slogans rather than two. Answers often create the illusion of mastery. You hear an explanation, you can repeat it, and suddenly you feel informed. But repetition is not understanding. Understanding shows itself when you can navigate unfamiliar situations, when you can predict outcomes, when you can recognize where an explanation applies and where it fails. Questions train that ability. Answers alone do not. There is also a deeper reason questions matter more. They keep you honest. An answer can be memorized without being examined. A question forces engagement. It requires you to confront uncertainty directly. It exposes how much of your confidence is borrowed. When you can't answer your own question, you are faced with a choice. Pretend you understand or admit that you don't. That moment separates performance from thinking. Most people choose performance. They collect answers like trophies. They quote them, defend them, build identities around them. And once an answer becomes part of who you are, questioning it feels like self-destruction. At that point, learning stops, not because there is nothing left to learn, but because curiosity has been sacrificed to self-protection. Questions don't let you hide that way. They strip away certainty. They force humility. They remind you that understanding is provisional. that explanations are tools, not truths carved into reality. This doesn't mean answers are useless. They are necessary. But they are not the destination. They are checkpoints, temporary resting places before the next question appears. The mistake is treating them as final. A mind focused on answers asks, what is the correct response? A mind focused on questions asks, what's really going on here? That difference changes everything. When you value questions, you listen differently. You notice inconsistencies. You pay attention to what doesn't fit. You become comfortable saying, I don't know yet, without feeling diminished by it. That comfort is not ignorance, it's intellectual maturity. The most dangerous phrase in thinking is that's settled. Nothing important ever truly is. Reality is too complex, too layered, too subtle for permanent closure. Every explanation is an approximation. Every model leaves something out. Questions keep those limitations visible. Without questions, answers harden into dogma. With questions, answers remain flexible, useful, and alive. So if you want depth, stop chasing closure. Stop collecting conclusions as if they were proof of intelligence. Start cultivating questions that make you uneasy, questions that challenge what you think you already know, questions that don't resolve quickly because answers may make you sound informed, but questions are what actually move you closer to understanding. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it, and no amount of confidence, credentials, or complex language will change that. Complexity is often mistaken for depth, but more often than not, it's camouflage. It hid. As gaps in understanding behind impressive words and long explanations that sound intelligent while saying very little. When someone truly understands something, they don't need to protect it with confusion. They can walk straight through it, clearly, step by step, without getting lost. Simplicity is not about dumbing things down. It's about stripping an idea to its core and seeing what actually holds it together. That process is brutally honest. It exposes every weak assumption, every borrowed explanation, every place where you've been pretending to understand instead of actually thinking. That's why people avoid it. It's far easier to repeat a complicated explanation than to build a simple one from scratch. When you explain something simply, you are forced to confront reality. You can't hide behind jargon. You can't lean on authority. You can't say, it just works that way and move on. You have to answer basic questions. What is happening? Why does it happen? What would happen if it didn't? Those questions are unforgiving. They don't care how educated you are. They don't care how many books you've read. They only care whether your explanation actually makes sense. Most people don't fail at understanding because the subject is too hard. They fail because they stop at the first explanation that sounds reasonable. They accept a description instead of building a mental model. They memorize conclusions without understanding the machinery underneath. As long as the explanation feels satisfying, they move on. That satisfaction is the trap. Real understanding feels different. It's quiet. It's precise. It allows you to predict outcomes and recognize when something doesn't fit. And it gives you the ability to explain the idea to someone else without relying on borrowed language. If you can't do that, you don't own the idea, you're renting it. Simple explanations are difficult because they require you to know what matters and what doesn't. They force you to distinguish the essential from the decorative. That takes work. It requires you to rethink the idea multiple times, each time removing unnecessary parts until only the structure remains. That structure is understanding. People often confuse simplicity with incompleteness. They think that a simple explanation must be missing something. Sometimes it is, but often what's missing is not truth, it's clutter. The mind loves clutter because it feels like progress. More details, more terms, more layers. But progress is not measured by how much you can say. It's measured by how clearly you can see. When an explanation is truly understood, it becomes flexible. You can approach it from different angles. You can explain it to different audiences. You can adjust it when new evidence appears. That flexibility comes from simplicity. Complex, fragile explanations break the moment conditions change. Simple ones adapt. There's another uncomfortable reason people avoid simple explanations. Simplicity makes you AC. Countable. If your explanation is clear, it can be tested. It can be challenged. Others can see exactly where it might fail. Complexity offers protection. It creates fog. In fog, mistakes are harder to spot. That's why simple explanations are often resisted, especially in intellectual environments. They threaten status. They remove the mystery that makes some people feel important. If everyone can understand the idea, then expertise has to be earned through accuracy, not presentation. Understanding something simply doesn't mean you ignore its depth. It means you understand the foundation well enough to build on it. Depth without clarity is not depth. It's confusion stacked on top of confusion. Clarity comes first. Complexity, when necessary, comes later. When you hear an explanation that leaves you more confused than when you started, don't assume the subject is too advanced. Consider the possibility that the explanation is bad. A good explanation increases understanding. It doesn't demand patience or faith. It earns trust by making sense. The discipline of simple explanation is a constant test. It forces you to revisit ideas you thought you understood and ask whether you really do. It exposes intellectual laziness. It separates genuine comprehension from polished repetition. If you want to know whether you understand something, try to explain it without notes, without jargon, and without rushing. If you get stuck, that's not a failure. That's feedback. It's telling you exactly where your understanding ends. And that's valuable information. Because understanding doesn't grow from pretending. It grows from identifying what you don't yet know and working patiently toward clarity. Simplicity is not the end of thinking. It's the proof that thinking is.
The mind only obeys when it sees that you take action. Words without action are nothing but empty promises. But when you act, even in the smallest way, you confirm to yourself, I'm in charge. And here's the secret. It's about keeping small commitments. Think of someone who decides to save $5 a day and actually does it. It doesn't matter that it's a small amount. What matters is that it was done. In that moment, the mind records, he follows through on what he says. That's when inner confidence begins to grow and the mind starts to obey. The mind is like a soldier. It needs clear orders and proof that you are the leader. When you procrastinate, the mind takes command. But when you act and follow through on your goals, no matter how small, you reclaim leadership. That's why one of the secrets that separates winners from everyone else is this. Never break the promise you make to yourself. If you say you'll wake up early, wake up. If you say you'll study, study. If you say you'll train, train. Every time you follow through, no matter the size, you strengthen the pact with yourself. And here's the magic. When you start acting in alignment with what you project, the external world responds. You begin to see opportunities you couldn't see before. You attract people who vibrate at the same frequency. You feel within yourself an energy that seemed asleep. This isn't luck. It's the natural consequence of alignment between mind and action. So starting today, choose one small daily action that represents the life you want to live. Want discipline? Make your bed every morning. Want abundance? Save and invest something daily, even if it's small. Want mental strength? Read for 10 minutes even when you don't feel like it. These simple acts build the fortress. But don't fall into the trap. The mind deceives you with excuses. It says, I'll start tomorrow. I can't today. It doesn't matter if I skip just once. But here's the key. Every time you give in to that voice, you train your mind to be undisciplined. Every time you conquer that voice, you train your mind to be indestructible. So answer me honestly. Are you willing to give orders to your mind and back them with actions? Because if you are, nothing can stop you. Your inner state reflects the outer world. Whoever controls their mind controls their world. Everything you see and touch is born first in the invisible space of your mind. If your mind is chaotic, your life will be chaotic. But if your mind is disciplined, your life becomes a masterpiece. Since childhood, you've been taught to memorize, to obey, but not to truly think. The system shaped your mind to be a servant of circumstances, not the master of your destiny. That's the poison. You don't realize you're living on autopilot. But there is a way to break this prison. There is a forbidden secret, hidden not because it's too hard to understand, but because it's so simple that most people never take it seriously. Your brain, like any part of your body, is a muscle, and every time you choose to exercise it through learning, you make it stronger. Imagine something with me that could flip your switch forever. What if every thought was like a wild horse? It runs fast, full of power, but completely without direction. completely out of control. Most people jump on this horse without a saddle, without reins, and end up being dragged by their own mind to places they never wanted to go. That's why they live tired, anxious, and full of regrets. But the forbidden secret that few dare to apply is this: you are not the horse, you are the rider. If you learn how to put reins on your mind, you can take it anywhere you want. Wealth, peace, success, freedom. Controlling the mind does not mean fighting against negative thoughts. That only makes them stronger. It means choosing which horse you ride. And here's the detail that separates ordinary people from extraordinary ones. Ordinary people feed any idea that shows up. Extraordinary people feed only the ones that push them forward.
So from today on, start replacing negative thoughts. Instead of thinking this will go wrong, ask yourself, does this thought bring me closer to what I want or further away? If it pushes you away, leave it in the field. If it brings you closer, mount it and ride it to the end. This simple decision, repeated daily, is the difference between a life of mental slavery and a life of achievement. Feed your mind every day with words of power. Start right now by writing in the comments, "I control my mind." Give your brain a direct command, a signal that from today you take the reins. The more you affirm, the more your mind believes. And the more it believes, the more your life changes. Every time you conquer your mind in small moments, when you choose to focus on studying, when you resist procrastination, when you don't let fear take over, you are training for the big battles. Whoever conquers themselves in the small things can conquer anything in the world. Pay close attention to me now, because this can change everything. The mind obeys only one law: focus. Wherever you place your attention consistently, energy accumulates. If you place it on fear, you create a future of limitations. If you place it on disciplined desire, you create a future of achievements. So starting today, choose one central idea that represents what you want to achieve: money, freedom, discipline. And every single day, feed that idea with images, words, and actions. Imagine what it would be like to live it. Speak it out loud as if it were already true. Take one small practical step that confirms it in the physical world. This repetition isn't just mental. It's a command for your brain to understand that this is the inevitable path.
When you repeat a thought with emotion, it becomes identity. It's no longer "I want to be disciplined," it's "I am disciplined." You don't need permission or luck or miracles. You only need to discipline your mind to project clearly what you want. And when that becomes a habit, everything around you begins to reorganize to make real what you have already built inside. Now stop and reflect with me. What good is controlling the mind if you don't direct it to create? The mind is like a projector. Everything you feed inside it will, sooner or later, materialize outside. And here's the secret. You're already creating your life. It's just that maybe you're creating what you don't want. Because every repeated thought, every emotion you feed, is like a brick placed in the building of your reality. Those who are organized inside themselves inevitably create opportunities around them. So turn discipline into pleasure. Success, in truth, is the journey itself, not merely its end. Most people view discipline as pain. But the greats, the ones who achieve everything, learn to take pleasure in every small victory over themselves. When they resist temptation, they celebrate. When they hit a tiny goal, they rejoice. They understood that real pleasure isn't in immediate indulgence, but in the power of looking at yourself and saying, "I am in command." Imagine what it would be like to live this way. Every time your mind whispers, "You can't," you smile and answer, "I'll prove you wrong." Every time laziness shows up, you turn it into training. Every time fear tries to paralyze you, you convert it into fuel to move forward. That's the secret game that turns ordinary people into unstoppable forces. And here's something I want you to remember. It's not about eliminating negative thoughts. It's about transforming them into energy to act. Fear can become courage. Anxiety can become focus. Laziness can become strength. It all depends on how you command them. The forbidden secret is not about silencing the mind. It's about stepping into the role of its leader. Now answer me. Have you been commanding your mind, or has it been commanding you? Those who don't command their own minds are controlled by them. Such people live like prisoners. They are led by impulses, puppets of thoughts that appear out of nowhere. The mind says, "Don't do it now, leave it for later." And they give in. The mind whispers, "You're not good enough," and the person believes it, quitting before they start. The mind fires off, "It'll fail, you'll make a fool of yourself." And so grand dreams are buried before they even leave the cradle. Those who are commanded by the mind are in reality commanded by fear. These people live exhausted because their minds never shut up. They chase everything and arrive nowhere. An untrained mind is like a dog loose in a marketplace. It chases every scent and every sound with no focus, no direction. At the end of the day, it's tired, and it is won nothing. And do you know the hardest part? A mind without a leader convinces the person that this is normal. It manufactures justifications, invents excuses, builds narratives so that the prison feels comfortable. It's the voice that says, "Everyone lives like this. It's no use trying. You weren't born for great things." This is the silent tyranny of a mind without an owner. Now stop and reflect. How many opportunities have you already lost because you believed a sabotaging thought? How many days have you wasted because your own mind convinced you it was better not to act? Those who are commanded by their minds don't truly live. They merely survive, obeying invisible orders. But the good news is, this can change the exact moment you decide to take the helm. The moment you choose to command, the mind stops being a jailer and becomes a servant. Because after all, the mind was never meant to be your enemy. It just needs a leader, and that leader must be you. If you truly want to command your mind, listen carefully to what I'm about to say. The power to command your mind lies in something you do every single day, yet hardly notice. The first key is simple. Realize that your mind is not you. It is like a wild horse, full of power, but without direction. Until you take the reins, it will run wherever it pleases, toward fear, anxiety, distraction, laziness. But when you seize the reins firmly, you choose the path. How do you do that? Picture the scene with me. You wake up and your mind is already shouting, tossing worries, old memories, and thoughts of failure at you. Most people surrender and let the horse bolt. But from today on, you will breathe deeply, close your eyes for a few seconds, and give one clear order. Quiet. I am in command. It seems simple, and that's exactly why it works. The mind obeys those who speak with clarity. Commanding the mind isn't about winning a single battle in one day. It's about building a constant dialogue, as if you were training a stubborn apprentice. In the beginning, it resists. It pushes you back to old habits, to procrastination, to fears. But every time you pull it back into order, it's like laying another brick in the wall of your self-mastery. Think of an archer. He doesn't hit the target with his first arrow. He misses, adjusts, breathes, tries again. Until one day, almost without noticing, his arm, his gaze, and his heart align. The mind works the same way. You don't need to win all at once. You just need to choose not to quit. Now imagine your mind as a river. If you drop any object into it, the current carries it away. That's how random thoughts work. They appear and drag you along. But when you consciously decide to build a bridge over that river, you're no longer carried away by the current. You walk above it. That bridge is built through repetition, through phrases you declare to yourself every single day, through small victories, through firm decisions. And here's the secret that can change everything for you. The mind does not respond to vague orders. If you say, "I think I can," it hears doubt. If you say, "I will do it," it hears certainty. The command must be firm, clear, direct, like a general who does not ask, but commands. And the moment your mind recognizes that firmness, it stops fighting against you and begins fighting for you. Commanding the mind is not about suffocating bad thoughts. It's about transforming them into energy. The fear that once paralyzed you now becomes a sign that you're about to grow. The anxiety that once trapped you now becomes fuel to act. The doubt that once froze you now becomes curiosity to learn. That is the point where you stop being a slave to your mind and become its master. And I want you to keep this within you.
Commanding the mind is not about brute force, it's about clarity. It's about telling yourself every single day who you are, what you accept, and where you're going. It's a living practice, a silent discipline, slowly building a fortress no one can invade. Now pay close attention. If you truly want to master your mind, you must understand two simple keys, yet they carry the power to transform inner empires: meditation and writing. Meditation is not about sitting still with your eyes closed, trying not to think of anything. Meditation is, in truth, the supreme training of command. It is you sitting in silence and realizing you are not obligated to follow every thought that appears. It's like watching cars pass on a highway. They go by, but you don't have to jump into every one of them. When you meditate, you are telling your mind, I observe you, but I am not you. That simple exercise creates space, and in that space, freedom is born. And why is this so powerful? Because every form of manipulation begins when you believe you are your thoughts. If the mind says you can't, you believe it. If the mind says you don't deserve it, you fall silent. But when you train through meditation, you begin to laugh at these thoughts. They appear, but they no longer have chains. You realize they're only clouds, not the sky. They're only waves, not the ocean. Now imagine combining this with the power of writing. Writing is not just recording words. It is a ritual of clarity. When you write what you feel, you take the invisible chaos of the mind and place it before you in the form of letters. And what happens? What once seemed enormous in your head looks small on paper. What once seemed confusing gains order. Writing is like holding the reins of a wild horse. Suddenly, you realize you can guide it. Many think writing down goals or thoughts is childish, but all the great ones who commanded their own minds, philosophers, leaders, sages, kept notebooks. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself every day, not to publish, but to command. Napoleon Hill said a desire only becomes real when it is written down. And Feynman used notebooks as a way to clarify ideas that, if left only in the mind, would get lost. When you meditate, you silence the noise. When you write, you organize what remains. Together, these two acts become like sword and shield on the battlefield of the mind. Now imagine this applied to your own life. You wake up, take a deep breath, sit in silence for a few minutes. Watch your mind racing, and instead of fighting, you simply let it pass. Then, you take a notebook and write, Today, I command my mind. Today, I act with focus. Today, I take one step closer to my dream. This combination is what separates those who live as slaves of the mind from those who live as its masters. Because in the end, it's not about silencing thoughts. It's about choosing which ones deserve to become action. Now, I want you to make a commitment to yourself. Write in the comments, I command my mind, and start applying this power today. Like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and let's transform ordinary minds into extraordinary ones together. Because your mind was never born to cage you. It was born to become your greatest ally.
Try to imagine nothing. Absolute nothing. No air, no light, no particles, no stuff of any kind. Just pure emptiness. You can't do it. I mean, you think you can. You picture blackness, you picture void, but even that blackness is something. Even imagining empty space, you're imagining space. And space turns out to be very much something. This is where it gets strange. This is where your intuition completely fails you. So here's the question. What's between the atoms? You learned in school that everything is made of atoms, fine, and you probably picture them like little balls, little solid spheres packed together to make stuff. But they're not packed together. They're not even close to each other. There's space between them, enormous amounts of space relative to their size. And what fills that space? Most people say, nothing. Empty void. The atoms are the stuff, and between them is just absence, just distance, just nothing waiting for something to happen. Wrong, completely wrong.
Between every atom in your body, between every atom in this room, between every atom everywhere, something exists. Something real, something physical, something that carries energy and exerts force and holds the entire universe together. Let me show you what I mean. Put your hand on a table. Go ahead, actually do it if there's a table nearby. You feel that? Solid, hard. Your hand stops, the table stops it. Seems like the most basic thing in the world. But your hand never touched that table. The atoms in your hand never made contact with the atoms in the table, not even close. See, the outer edge of every atom is surrounded by electrons, little negative charges buzzing around the nucleus. And when your hand gets close to the table, the electrons in your hand approach the electrons in the table. Negative approaching negative. Same charge. And what do same charges do? They repel. They push each other away. They absolutely refuse to occupy the same space. So what you feel when you touch that table, that sensation of solidity, that pressure, that stop, it's not atoms hitting atoms. It's electrical repulsion, fields pushing against fields. The electrons in your hand getting close enough to the electrons in the table that their electric fields start screaming at each other. No, 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 you can't come here. Go back. This space is taken. And your brain interprets that electromagnetic repulsion as touch, as solid, as contact. But there's a gap. There's always a gap. Your atoms and the table's atoms never meet. They never make contact. They're always separated by this invisible cushion of electric force. You're floating right now. Did you know that? You're not actually sitting on your chair. You're hovering above it, suspended by electromagnetic repulsion, floating on an invisible cushion of force. You've been floating your whole life. Every time you thought you touched something, you were hovering just above it. Now think about what this means for the question we started with. What's between the atoms? Field, electric field, electromagnetic field. And these fields are not nothing. People make this mistake all the time. They think fields are just a mathematical convenience, a way of calculating things, a shortcut. No, the field is there. It exists in space. It carries energy. It has momentum. It does things. Every charged particle, every electron, every proton creates an electric field that extends outward in all directions, not just nearby, all the way out, getting weaker with distance, but never quite reaching zero. In principle, the electric field from an electron in your fingertip extends across the entire universe. So atoms aren't isolated little balls floating in nothing. They're the centers of these fields that spread outward and overlap and interact. The space between atoms is filled with field, layer upon layer of electromagnetic influence. When you look at matter, when you look at solid stuff, what you're really seeing is a dense web of overlapping fields, electrons repelling electrons, creating the illusion of solidity through pure electromagnetic force. The stuff isn't the atoms. The stuff is the field. The atoms are just the places where the fields get intense, where the action concentrates, but the fields themselves extend everywhere. Between every atom in your body, right now, fields are pushing and pulling, maintaining structure, holding molecules together, keeping you from collapsing or flying apart. Chemical bonds, the things that hold atoms together into molecules, those are electromagnetic fields doing work. The structure of matter is field structure. So, already the answer to what's between the atoms is not nothing. It's field. It's electromagnetic influence. It's the invisible fabric that makes touching possible by making it impossible. You never touch anything precisely because there's something between you and everything else. And that something is the field. But here's where it gets even stranger. So we've established that the space between atoms is filled with fields, electromagnetic fields reaching out from every charged particle, overlapping, interacting, creating the invisible fabric that holds everything together. But that's not the whole story. That's not even the weird part yet. Let me ask you something. What happens if you remove all the atoms? Not just some of them, all of them. You take a region of space and you pump out every single particle of matter, every atom, every molecule, every speck of dust. You create the most perfect vacuum possible. Now what's there? Nothing, right? That's what vacuum means. That's what empty means. You took everything out, so nothing remains. So, here's the thing. Physics says you're wrong. Nature absolutely refuses to be empty. The universe will not allow true nothingness to exist anywhere, ever, under any circumstances. This comes from quantum mechanics, from something called the uncertainty principle. And look, most people have heard of the uncertainty principle, but they think it's about measurement, about how observing things changes them. That's part of it, but there's something deeper. The uncertainty principle says certain pairs of properties cannot both be exactly determined at the same time. Position and momentum, you can't know both precisely, but also, and this is the important part, energy and time. You cannot have a region of space with exactly zero energy for any extended period. It's forbidden. The mathematics won't allow it. Perfect emptiness would require perfect precision, exactly zero energy. And quantum mechanics says, no, you don't get that kind of precision. Nature doesn't work that way. So what happens instead? The vacuum fluctuates, even with nothing in it, even with every particle removed. Space itself is restless. It shivers. It can't hold still. Pairs of particles appear out of nowhere, literally out of nothing. A particle and its antiparticle, an electron and a positron, a quark and an antiquark. They pop into existence spontaneously. They exist for an incredibly brief moment, so short you almost can't define it. And then they find each other, annihilate, and vanish. Gone, like they were never there. Virtual particles, they're called. Virtual because you can't catch them, can't trap them in a jar and study them. They exist too briefly, but they're real. They have effects, measurable effects. So, now you're asking, wait, where does the energy come from? You can't make particles out of nothing. That violates conservation of energy. Something can't come from nothing. Good question, really good question. But here's how nature handles it. The uncertainty principle allows you to borrow energy from nowhere, as long as you pay it back fast enough. The shorter the loan, the more you can borrow. Virtual particles pop into existence on borrowed energy, exist for a fleeting instant, then annihilate and pay back the debt before the universe notices. It's like taking money from a cash register, buying something, then returning it and putting the money back before anyone checks the books. As long as everything balances at the end, it's allowed. Nature runs on credit at the quantum scale. Constant borrowing and repaying, everywhere, all the time. And this isn't theoretical speculation. This isn't physicists playing mathematical games. We can measure this. There's an experiment called the Casimir effect that proves empty space isn't empty. You take two metal plates, very thin, very flat, and you put them incredibly close together in a vacuum, almost touching but not quite. Tiny gap between them, and they attract. They pull toward each other. Not gravity, that's way too weak at this scale. Not static electricity, nothing's charged. The plates are neutral. The space between them is empty. There's no reason for them to move. But they do. They pull together. Squeezed by nothing, pushed by empty space itself. So, why? Virtual particles. See, virtual particles have wavelengths, like waves in the ocean. Different sizes of oscillation. When the plates are very close, some wavelengths don't fit between them. Those virtual particles can't pop into existence in that gap because there's no room for their wavelength. So you get fewer virtual particles between the plates than outside them. More quantum activity outside, less inside. That imbalance creates pressure. More pushing in than pushing out. The plates move together. This has been measured precisely. The force matches exactly what quantum mechanics predicts. Empty space exerts pressure. The vacuum pushes things around. Now think about what this means for our question. What's between the atoms? Fields, yes, but those fields aren't just sitting there quietly. The space between atoms, that space filled with electromagnetic fields, it's also churning with virtual particles, appearing, disappearing, borrowing energy, paying it back, billions of times per second. The emptiness inside matter is not empty. It's the busiest place you can imagine. Creation and destruction happening constantly at scales too small and too fast to directly observe. And this is true everywhere, not just between atoms in your body. The space between here and the moon, between stars, between galaxies, same thing. Virtual particles flickering in and out. The vacuum seething with activity. There is no quiet place in the universe. There is no spot where truly nothing happened. You cannot find emptiness. Nowhere in the cosmos does actual nothing exist. Physics won't allow it. So the vacuum churns with virtual particles. The space between atoms buzzes with fields and quantum fluctuations. Emptiness, true emptiness, doesn't exist anywhere. Now let's put this all together and see what it really means. People think about the vacuum as absence, the default state. What's left when you remove all the interesting stuff? The boring background where things happen. But that's completely backward. The vacuum isn't absence, it's foundation. It's not what remains when you take everything away. It's what everything comes out of. The vacuum is the ground state of reality, the quietest possible configuration of the fields that fill all of space. And even that quietest state cannot be perfectly still. So here's the part that really twists your brain. Particles aren't stuff that exists in empty space. Particles are the fields doing something. A particle is just a ripple in a field, an excitation, a place where the field vibrates a little harder than the quiet background hum. The electron isn't a little ball sitting in the electromagnetic field. The electron is the electromagnetic field, bunched up, concentrated, doing something more intense than usual. And those fields exist everywhere, not just where particles are, everywhere. The whole universe is filled with fields, overlapping, extending through all of space. And particles are just the places where those fields get excited. And think about what this means for you, for what you are. You're made of atoms. Those atoms are mostly empty space. But that empty space is filled with fields. And those fields are fluctuating with virtual particles. And the particles themselves, the electrons and quarks that seem so solid, they're just excitations in deeper fields. There's no bottom. There's no foundation. There's no solid stuff that everything else is made of. You zoom in looking for the ultimate substance. The bedrock reality keeps dissolving. Atoms are mostly empty. The empty is full of field. The fields are full of fluctuations. The particles are made of field excitations. Fields all the way down. So it's like looking for the bottom of a lake and discovering the lake has no bottom, just water all the way down, getting stranger and darker the deeper you go, but never hitting rock. At some point, you have to accept there is no rock. There's just process, just activity, just things happening. The universe isn't made of stuff, it's made of happening. Matter isn't substance sitting in empty space. Matter is space doing something, a different configuration of the same fields that make up the vacuum. You and the empty space next to you are made of the same thing, the same field, the same quantum foundation. You're just arranged differently. You're a pattern that persists, a ripple that keeps going, a fluctuation that got complicated enough to wonder what it's made of. And here's something else. Those fields connect everything. The electromagnetic field in your body is the same field as the electromagnetic field in a star 10 billion light years away. Same field, not a copy, not a similar field. The same continuous field extending through all of space. Particles are just places where that universal field does something interesting. Between those places, the field continues, quieter but present. You're not separate from the universe. You can't be. You're a localized pattern in fields that have no edges, that extend everywhere, that connect everything to everything else. So, back to our question. What's between the atoms? Field. Real physical fields that carry energy and exert forces. Virtual particles bubbling up from the quantum vacuum. Activity that never stops. Fluctuation that never rests. Potential that fills every point in space. Not nothing, never nothing. The space between atoms is the same stuff as the atoms themselves, just in a quieter state. When you reach out and touch something, you don't cross empty distance. You push through fields. Your fields interact with other fields. Electromagnetic repulsion creates the sensation of contact. But there's no emptiness to cross. It's fields all the way. The solid world you think you live in, the empty space you think surrounds it, these are both the same thing. Both are fields. The difference is just intensity, just pattern, just how much activity is happening where. And when you finally get this, when it really sinks in, reality looks different. The world stops being solid objects in empty space. It starts being what it actually is, a web of interacting fields, patterns emerging and dissolving, activity that never stops, no hard edges anywhere, no true emptiness anywhere. Everything connected to everything by the very medium it's made of. You're made of that. A brief, complicated ripple in fields that were here before you and will be here after. The space inside you and the space between galaxies is the same space, made of the same fields, doing the same things. The only difference is the pattern. That's the answer. That's what's between the atoms. Not nothing, something. Something that turns out to be the same something that atoms themselves are made of. There is no between, really. There's just field, everywhere, in various states of excitation. And what we call matter is just the excited parts. So, can you imagine nothing now? True nothing? Absolute emptiness? You can't. And now you know why. Because nothing doesn't exist. Never did. The universe is incapable of emptiness. Even the quietest, most remote, most vacant corner of space churns with activity, buzzes with potential, refuses to be still. Reality isn't stuff and void. Reality is field. The field is everywhere, and everywhere, always, something is happening. That's what's between the atoms. That's what's between everything. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The solid world dissolves into shimmering activity, and emptiness reveals itself as the busiest place of all.